Damn it, I can never remember. Do you have to talk to Locke? No. You have to talk to the lady to find out about Sabin, don't you? Let's see here. Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. Hi. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Spoilers Everywhere discussion stream about Final Fantasy VII R1. I apologize. I was trying to play an actual Final Fantasy game for a second there. I do hope you guys will all be willing and capable of joining us and having fun today. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to plug out really quick. First of all, we have the awesome Roximus, who currently his background is not there for some reason. That's very strange. I'm not sure why it's not there. I really am not. Whatever. He doesn't get a background. He doesn't deserve one. Who needs it? And we also have the ever-amazing Mike from, some of you may remember him from Dark Pixel Gaming. Nowadays it's known as Resident Arc. The ever-popular and amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, I have one rule. What's my rule?
Be civil.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah, yeah. That is the only rule I have on my show. That's it. You want to disagree, you want to argue, you want to do all kinds of stuff. Great. I actually anticipate we will all disagree on many points, and that's awesome. Don't be a dick. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about Final Fantasy VII R1, and that means, by absolute definition, we will be spoiling the ever-living crap out of FF7 R1 and FF7 and Doom Eternal.
It's relevant.
It's relevant, I swear. So for anybody interested in not being spoiled on those things, that's your warning. It's also in the title, and I also mentioned it in the tweet. Okay, so first thing I want to ask really quick is, if you were a coconut or a cassava melon, which one would you think would be better? No, I'm sorry. I'm just messing around. I'm Jocelyn. I do want to just kind of jump right into this here. I want to start with kind of softballs, if that's okay. We'll kind of lean up into things, because I have a few questions here. I asked both of these two wonderful gentlemen if they have anything to say on their own, and they said no. So we'll get right into it.
Hey, man, it's 8 o'clock where we're at. I woke
I know. If it makes you feel better, I'm tired too. I'm always tired. Oh, I should be wearing these for today. Excuse me. Let me get into proper cosplay here. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen. First thing I want to talk about, actually, there's two things. First, I want to talk about 2009, and then I want to talk about slight variance. Now, bear me out here a little bit. I do apologize. I know some of you have heard this before, but this is mostly for people who didn't hear the explanation at the very end of the stream last night. Star Trek 2009 was a film that came out in the wake of a total absence of Star Wars films, and was designed to fill that particular niche by Paramount in an attempt to try and bolster their holdings and make some money. Now, the thing about Star Trek 2009, though, and this is the obvious relevance, is that Star Trek 2009 is a sequel. That is to say, it is actually a direct follow-through of the original Star Trek timeline, despite the fact that it could be argued to be a remake or a reboot or reimagining or whatever. The harsh truth is, it followed the events of the original Star Trek, and that's important. If it was not for... spoilers for Star Trek 2009, I apologize. But... If it was not for the events of Spock and the events that led to the destruction of Romulus, there never would have been a Star Trek 2009. And that had a massive sea change effect on the timeline that the 2009 thing happened. You know, it changed the way technology developed, it changed the way people interact with each other, changed people's personalities, it changed Starfleet as a structure. It changed the fact that Doom Rider gave me $3. Thank you very, very much, Doom Rider. That only happened in the 2009 timeline. Doom Rider only gave me $5 last time. Or wait. Point being... that significance is, I feel, exactly what they're going for here. And my viewers can prove this, because I said 2009 very early on in the stream. In fact, my second day of playing through the game, I called that this was some kind of soft reboot / sequel.
Yeah, there were some people who came over to my stream and said that you had called it, like, long before you actually got to the ending.
Oh my God.
He called the Advent Children connection in the final boss fight. He called a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's... Which brings me immediately to slight variance, of course. So, slight variance, brief story. I'll try to keep this brief. It was a story I wrote back in the day, and this is actually important. It was a self-insert story, because that was the challenge we were doing at the time. I was part of a writing group, and we all used to write little short stories and share them with each other. And my particular short story, it was all about a guy named Lore. Obviously, that wasn't the name. And he was this big cackling, Dr. Wily evil kind of character. And everyone was like, yep, okay. And nobody questioned it for a second. And the big twist, and I know that's a weird way to put that, but the big twist was that it wasn't me. In fact, my character, that is to say the self-insert I was, died before the story actually began. And that set off a series of events, and it led to the big reveal of this guy who was basically a pretender who had no idea what he was doing. Now, I don't want to bore you with my story, but the relevance of that story was that it only worked because I knew exactly who was going to be reading it. Because I knew everyone was going to be reading that and automatically assuming that the big cackling villain was me in something that we all knew was a self-insert thing, was advertised as a self-insert thing, would then make them all assume that. And I got tons of positive feedback about that story because it caught everyone by surprise. Now, you probably know why I'm mentioning that with regards to this. I don't know if it's going to get the whole positive feedback side of the story. But the relevance here, of course, is that this is so clearly not made for people who are not familiar with FF7.
Yeah.
And that's the first topic I really want to open into, because, I mean, do you think that's a good thing? I suppose it's the most obvious and immediate question.
Well, I mean, it leads to the validity of calling this a sequel, for sure. I mean, the fact that it's self-referential in that way. I mean, I've been kind of having this debate with a lot of people online, like, debating what classifies as a remake or not, and whether this is a sequel or not. And I can't understand how you don't see that it is clearly a sequel. And I guess we'll get into that a little bit more later, but no, I'm not into it at all. Not at all. And I'll have a lot to say about that as we go on, but I'll start with this. I'll give you my hot take right out the bat, or right out of the gate. Not only am I not into it, it is expressly anti-Final Fantasy, in my opinion, to have turned this into a sequel. And that has to do with the philosophy of Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the series. And I have a bunch of quotes prepared that I'll read and explain that as we go on, but that's just for now. I want to start there. That's my position on this. Is that turning this into a sequel was not only super dumb because of how they went about it, in just like the most comic book stupid way possible, but also this is totally against the spirit of Final Fantasy to have done this. So, no, I hated it.
So, I'm kind of in agreement when it comes to the whole sequel thing. Like, I view it as completely unnecessary, completely antithetical to Final Fantasy as a series. You know, I'm not with that. However, when it comes to just changes in general, I'm a bit more cautiously optimistic.
Sorry, I had myself muted because I finally got Rex's background guys going, hey, professional streamer, ladies and gentlemen.
Professional at work.
I do want to add, kind of as an addendum here. Let's actually do this in this order. I changed my mind. How would both of you feel? And this is for you guys in chat too. I'm still watching chat. Don't think we're not. Well, I'm not. I don't know if they are. But if you could just the last 20 minutes of the game off, how would you feel about that? And if it's not clear, Motorball, you're at the end. Cut to credits.
You go first, Rex.
Yes, absolutely. By far. Like, the only thing I would add is I'd probably say, okay, hey, bring Roche back and make him part of that final boss fight, because, you know, he felt underutilized otherwise. But, you know, the chapter 18 in general just felt non sequitur. I just was not with it at all. And, you know, the whole defying fate thing, I don't like Toriyama's writing in general, and that felt very Toriyama-esque. It just felt out of place when it came to Final Fantasy VII.
Mike?
Yeah, I had a lot of problems with many things leading up to that moment. So that's not to say that I hated everything. Like, I really do think that there were some legitimately good places, or at least ideas, for where they expanded the story. I loved a lot of Chapter 3, where you go to the top plate with Jessie and the other Avalanche members, and you learn about, you know, her family and her ambitions to be an actress. and you have kind of a heart-to-heart moment with Biggs and Wedge as they explain these things, endearing you a little bit more to those characters, especially in light of what I knew was going to happen with the Sector 7 plate and the fact that they were going to be fighting to try and save the pillar, right? And the fact that in the original game, those characters die in this moment. So I was like, okay, this is great. I thought that's where they're going with that. That could be a more powerful moment. I thought that Chapter 2 was a super good idea.
Remind me.
In relation to the moral conundrum with what Barrett and Avalanche are doing. In the original game, one of my favorite parts about that is when Kate Sith, Catchy, whatever it's supposed to be pronounced as, calls Barrett out directly and says, like, do you realize that you were responsible for the suffering and death of like a lot of people? And Barrett tries to, brush it off, but eventually realizes and admits, it sounds cool to say that I was doing this for the planet, but really I was doing it because I wanted revenge on Shinra, and I didn't care who I hurt along the way, right? Now, that was nice, the way that was delivered in the game, but I feel like that was a really good place where they could expand more and flesh that out. And from all the trailers, they made it seem like Tifa was super conflicted about this, and some of the other Avalanche members. And I was like, okay, they're going to actually really dive into that and build on that, moral conundrum. And Chapter 2, where you actually see the effect of the people right after this terrorist attack has gone on, people who, are concerned about their family members, who are injured, who are terrified. Like, that was so good. So, like, there's moments like these that are, like, amazing, legitimate ways to expand and flesh out and make the story even better. But...
However...
they undermined those things in specific ways. Again, won't get into it right now. So it wasn't just the last 20 minutes is what I'm getting at.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll just quickly finish up. If what you're asking is if they had just cut off like the ending, and it just ended with like whatever the boss is that you're fighting, is it Motorball that you fight on the highway?
Yeah.
And then they're just like, okay, we're going to go out in the world, end of game. I don't know, because if the question is more like if they were removing the elements from the story that appear at the end, then obviously I would like that. But if they're still going to be there, they just cut it out of this game and then we just see it next time. No, I'm so against the entire concept of everything that they brought into the ending there that there's no way I think that they could even pull that off that I would have been happy with at all. So
I will talk about the ghosts next. I want to address Zach next, but before I do that, I do want to go and give my own quick opinion here, because one of the reasons I mentioned the last 20 minutes thing, and Pax and I talked about this last night too, is oh God, where do I even begin? Hang on, give me a second to collect myself. This is gonna sound weird, but exclude the Zack stuff for just a second. Like, just erase the Zack stuff in its entirety.
Cool, I've already done that.
If you do that, there is a surprising amount of logic and connectivity when it comes to how the ending is constructed narratively. However, even keeping that in mind, that is also theory, by the way. Someone in chat pointed that out, and it's very valid. That is still the realm of theory, that it makes sense. It's entirely possible they could just throw that completely out the window. But even if we were to presume that is the intent and that's done properly, the problem I have is that the last 20 minutes are a massive tonal shift from the entire rest of the game. Even, again, ignoring the original FF7, which is fairly hard to do in this case, just comparing it to this game, it's like all of a sudden you get this whiplash of, okay, so now, you remember how maybe about 20 minutes earlier we were having trouble moving like a metal crate to get out of the way, and Barrett and Red 13 had to combine forces to get that out of the way, and there was a couple of soldiers showed up and we were threatened by 2 guys. No, now she's kicking literally tons of concrete out of the way, and they're fighting on this floating, hovering thing. And I know that spectacle's a thing, but it was such a massive tonal whiplash from the entire rest of the game that bothered me. Even ignoring the Zack thing, even ignoring the logic thing, and even ignoring the narrative thing, it still bugs me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's just, it's a very Nomura thing to do.
Yeah, the spectacle, like, okay, the story definitely took more cues from Toriyama. The spectacle, 100% Nomura. I will definitely say, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And before anyone says this, I've actually already heard this defense. It was all an illusion, is the big defense I hear, for why it's just suddenly this big... And... I mean, yeah...
I mean,
that doesn't make it better, though.
Anything.
Just, I mean, okay, if I've analyzed fiction for like 20 years at this point. Even if you can come up with a reasonable explanation for it, it doesn't necessarily make it good. That's a point I've pushed so many times in my life.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, they literally call it the singularity. It actually pops up in the upper right as the location. Singularity. It's like, okay, yeah, that's nice. What?
Yeah.
Now, okay, so I said I'd talk about Zack next. So I mentioned ejecting Zack. That's the only way that actually lines up neatly at all. If I could side rail for just a second. Anybody remember my review and lore run, the proper remake lore run of Final Fantasy 1? Did anybody watch that?
I have seen it.
Holy crap! I actually didn't expect you to have seen that.
Remember it.
I've seen all your Final Fantasy videos.
Holy cramoly. That is shocking. So, no, the reason I bring that up is the ending of FF1 made perfect sense until they screwed it up. And I'm dead serious. I go into detail especially during the proper remake lore run, of exactly how it all lined up perfectly until they had to screw it up. And I feel like that's relevant because, again, the logic of events does narratively... Well, no, narrative's the wrong word. It does logically fit. There is a math to why Sephiroth is here, why he's absorbing the Whispers. We'll get to them in a second. Why this is a changed timeline, why this is the Sephiroth from the future, blah, blah, blah. All of that does line up until Zack shows up out of nowhere, which just throws a giant wrench into all the theories, because there's not a lot of ways to cohese Zack and everything else. I've come up with a few, because it's my job, but I don't think they did.
So what do you think it is?
Well, okay, so I actually have several theories, and I will go ahead and go down these in quick succession. Let's see, do you guys want the most idealistic or the most cynical first?
Idealistic.
Okay.
Yeah. Start with the good, go for the bad.
Hear me out, because this could be cool. I think what they could be doing is, in an effort to showcase and keep things varied and maintain an alteration of not only tone, but still maintaining some adherence to the original story, think of it this way. Calm to Midgar Zalem, Cloud and crew. Then transition, and we go from the cave over to Junon as Zack and crew.
So you're thinking that they could split it off to essentially following two stories between those two timelines,
and show the different. And
I've actually been thinking about the same sort of thing.
there's a huge amount.
DLC, they'll have like the bomb.
Oh no, not even a DLC. I'm talking like main presentation. Oh, for that, yeah. I'll give you that. But I feel like there's actually a huge amount of storytelling potential there to show what is effectively the Elseworlds. Sorry, for those of you not familiar with it, Elseworlds, it refers to, here's an alternate continuity where one thing has changed. And it's a comic thing. DC Comics, I think, or Marvel, one of the two. I always forget which one. But I feel like there's a lot of potential for showing the Elseworlds of what happened in Zack's timeline. We already see a few things. Biggs didn't die because Zack didn't fail him. To put that as bluntly as possible. And I don't even mean that as a harsh thing, because Zack is more experienced, more combat capable, more together mentally, and frankly, a better hero than Cloud is at that point in time.
So you're saying...
yeah, I actually think the Biggs thing was in the alternate timeline.
In the Zack timeline.
Mm-hmm. Bingo.
Okay.
And so the idea is, here's what's happening when Zack took place of Cloud. That's pretty much the overall idea. And maybe Cloud got better in that timeline. Maybe Tifa ended up, trying to take care of Cloud and didn't actually end up joining the party because she was just full-time taking care of him, like in the Mediel sequence in the original game. Maybe Barrett ended up dying in the first reactor because Zack wouldn't have gone on that particular mission. And so now Avalanche is missing its main leader and Zack has to come in. That's the whole point of an Elseworlds. Original story, one change, what happens?
I like the comment from Leander. He brings up Radiant Historia.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly the direction I'm thinking
what I'm
that.
thinking too. Yeah.
So that's the most idyllic possibility for me, is that they could show both timelines more or less concurrently. Now, there's also, and I think Plutonia pointed this out, there's a huge amount of possibility for them to completely screw that up. And that, of course, goes back to what I call, like, I'm going to stumble over my words for a second. What I like to call the writer factor, a.k.a. how much trust do you have in your writers? How much trust do you guys have in the writers of FF7R2?
not even a fraction of a percent. None whatsoever.
As much as I respect some of Nomura's ideas, and I think Nojima has hit it out of the park sometimes, overall, no.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as I listen to you explain that, I mean, from the perspective of respecting you and your thought process behind this, I still think it's an incredibly dumb idea.
I wouldn't do it either.
Like,
Yeah,
I mean, the whole thing, the entire premise, no matter how they handle this, I'm not on board. I hate the entire idea of this being a time travel alternate reality story. There's nothing they can do to redeem that for me. It's over already. I'm done. I've checked out. You can't get me back now. It's over.
Which leads me to the second most cynical option. This is not the most cynical option. The second most cynical option is, and I'm going to say this as nicely as I possibly can. I gotta follow my own rule after all. This is nonsense. And what they're going to do is have nonsense where, just tell me you can't picture Zack and his adventures as he's going on and he crosses over across time because of his connection to Cloud, and Cloud's like, yes, I am empowered by Zack now and I can fight against Genova, and Sephiroth's like, oh, I will defeat you, and then Zack and Cloud come together and they both grab the Buster Sword at the same time. We are true heroes, the honor of soldier, flally flim flally, tintata flum flu.
I've heard some other people theorizing that eventually the timelines would converge and that Zack and Cloud would fight together against Sephiroth.
Yep.
In the Northern Crater,
Yep.
Yeah.
Like I said, nonsense.
Shadowbringers did it, but Shadowbringers did it well.
Yeah. Oh my god. So there's that option, and that is probably the most realistic option.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I mean, why would you tease this? Why would you set this up if
Exactly.
that was not the payoff you're working towards? I can't see any scenario in which that is not the reason why they showed Zack at all.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Admittedly, I can think of one reason, and that's the most cynical option.
Let's hear it.
Have any of you ever heard of a backdoor pilot?
I don't think so.
I'm familiar with the term, but I don't remember what it means.
So, a backdoor pilot is when it's, and forgive me, I'm going to go and explain this a little bit then, because this is a big problem in Hollywood. It's when a particular show or series, it usually applies to television, they have a running thing and they introduce effectively another show within the first show, and so the pilot of the second show happens as an episode of the first show. And then that allows them to launch the second show, assuming interest is there. Now, the problem is that almost always universally turns out badly, because what you do is you hurt the first show by basically making it focus on the second show. You hurt the second show by not really showing any trust in it, and also kind of not really having the financial backing to make it be properly marketed. And then what usually happens is both shows can, which is actually, by the way, for those of you not aware, exactly what happened to Star Trek, the original series. Because there was actually a backdoor pilot in Star Trek TOS. I know several of you know this, Assignment Earth. But this used to be a very common policy. They've kind of moved away from that in more recent times. But usually that's a bad thing. Which, of course, you see why I'm bringing this up.
Yep.
Sure. Absolutely.
The Zack game. Go buy the Zack game, guys. Please.
Yep.
I did already in 2007.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've actually had two at this point. But that's the most cynical possible option. Unfortunately, I do think that the middle option is most likely. They're going to do some nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly can't see it going any other way. I mean,
Neither can I.
Yeah. Which, of course,
I don't
leads
see
me...
any
Oh, sorry.
possibility where it doesn't happen.
Which, of course, leads me to the ghosts.
Okay.
I figured that was a good bridge, nonsense, ghosts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
Just a complete non sequitur there.
So, how would you feel if the ghosts were completely ejected from the game in their entirety?
Similar to the last 30 minutes of the game, I'm all for it. You and I have actually both said, if the ghosts were gone, Barrett would have died, and we both view that as, I don't want to necessarily say constructive change, but a change that is overall for the better.
Yeah, by the way, Mike, I know you haven't heard this. I would have killed Barrett if I was in charge of this. Right after this President Shinra scene, which I actually thought was a good individual scene. And Shinra confronting Barrett, and Barrett, like you were talking about, him being forced to confront his own guilt, and just basically starting to begin to try to be a better person, and then he's dead. I feel like I would have left him dead in that scene, and I would have had that have a significant impact on basically the entire rest of the game. And by that, I mean, obviously Part 2 and Part 3 and whatever.
But obviously the ghost would have to be removed.
The ghost.
Yeah, the ghosts would have to not exist.
I've actually been thinking about this. That would also serve a very powerful purpose when it comes to Wedge, because it would... When I saw that Wedge had survived initially, I had a little glimmer of hope that, hey, maybe things are changing despite these plot ghosts. Like, I had already figured it out by that point, of course.
Yeah.
But, when it comes to, say, another character's death, it might instill a little bit of hope. Only to rip it away at the last second. I think that Aerith's death is something that, is... Everybody knows about it. Everybody expects it at this point. So why not subvert that a little bit? Why not say, okay, yeah, maybe she'll survive. Maybe she won't die. Maybe things will go differently. And then just, nope.
I want you to know that...
I have a couple of questions regarding this. So first, before I get onto what you said, Rex, about the killing Barrett thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you're talking about doing this while removing the ghosts. And I guess
I would...
The question I pose is, are you then advocating for the remake being, I think, what you refer to as a proper remake, but with radical changes of that kind for the purpose of subverting expectations or for surprising people this time around?
Yes and no.
Okay, go ahead.
See, the thing is, the intent is not to subvert, really. And I know that sounds strange, because it's like, oh, but you kill Barrett, right? Or the first thing, that would shock the hell out of everyone. But as weird as this may sound, that's not the intent. I'm not trying to subvert the original. I'm looking at this game in a vacuum and looking at the narrative arc Barrett has had. Barrett's been amazing, I'm sorry. I really like Barrett in this. And he's very personable. He's wonderfully voice acted. He has a great deal of dimensions to him. We see several different sides to his personality. And he goes through this very slow and gradual arc. He's probably the only one with an actual character arc in this game. And he gets to this big conclusion thing where he has this big confrontation with President Shinra, the literal personification of everything he hates and fights against. And, starts to push him down. And President Shinra, basically, Barrett proves to be the better man. Shinra proves, in the exact same scene, to be the worse man, to truly be everything Barrett is not, and what Barrett is trying not to become. And then, for me, that is the perfect moment to kill Barrett. And again, completely regardless of the original game, because just within this game, that is the ideal moment to pull that kind of punch as a writer. Okay. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Absolutely.
And this is something that I asked Night Sky Prince and Soldier First Class, who I had on my podcast this week, because we were talking about the way Sephiroth is utilized in the storyline. And there's a quote from Kitase where he says, he's very aware that he basically explains that he was inspired by Jaws and horror films in terms of how he wanted to reveal that character. And from a storytelling, like just a technical standpoint, it was so brilliantly done, where they just name drop him a couple times and they build all this mystery, and you see the bloodbath at the Shinra headquarters as you follow the trail of blood, and then you see his sword in the back of President Shinra, and they just like lead you further, like, who is Sephiroth? And then Palmer's just like freaking out. I saw him with my own eyes. And the characters are like, wait a minute, is he good? And Cloud's like, no way, not the Sephiroth. I mean, they just build it, and then they reveal him in the Nibelheim flashback, right? It's amazing. I did a whole video on how freaking amazing this was done. And so Kitase says, like, he explained that whole process, and he was like, but everyone knows who Sephiroth is, so we didn't want to do it that way since there's no surprise in that anymore, essentially. And so my question to my panel, and I guess to you guys, is surprising the audience who has already played the original game more important to you? I guess
I can already say
no.
no.
The original OG, like, you've played the original game. Is being surprised in this remake more important than telling a good story and remaining faithful to the powerful messages that were in that original game?
Again, absolutely not. No.
So I was actually going to bring that back up. I wouldn't subvert expectations for the sake of doing so. In terms of like Aerith's death and stuff like that, I want it to have just as much impact as it did in the original.
Sure.
But, I think that ultimately that's an impossible task. It is the emotional core of the game, but it came at such an unexpected time in the original game. I mean, aside from the whole, I'm walking through the forest, I'm going to die, that kind of stuff. Of course, we saw it coming from a mile away at that point. Yeah. But before then,
the moment that it happened, no one thought, oh, Sephiroth's going to jump down from the sky.
Yeah, no, nobody called that. Come on.
So I don't think that surprises are necessarily, like, they wouldn't be my goal, but in order to enhance the emotional punch that already exists, I would say that, sure, maybe we could do that sparingly.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I guess just for me, like, this mindset that Kitase had about, like, the importance of surprising the audience, I have two major gripes with this idea. First of all, like, it defeats the purpose of a remake. Like, you're remaking something because people wanted it remade. They wanted to re-experience the thing.
Wait, what?
They wanted it even though they knew what was in it.
Yep. Yep.
So, and on top of that, there are tons of people today who have not played the original, and their first exposure to Final Fantasy VII is this remake. So they don't know. They've seen, okay, fine. They've seen a picture of Sephiroth on the internet, or they saw him in a trailer for some Dissidia game or something, whatever.
Yeah.
People also know what sharks look like. That doesn't mean you can't show the shark and build suspense in Jaws. Like, who cares? Like, it's context that matters. So the whole approach from the team, like the guys at the very top, the producer, is like, well, we can't surprise people with this story, so it's not worth retelling that story again. Let's change the whole thing or do a sequel.
Yeah, no, that shouldn't be the primary goal.
I just don't get it. I don't get that. I don't get it. It makes no sense to me.
Unfortunately, so first, really quick, I do have to say that's why I emphasize so hard that I wouldn't be killing Barrett to subvert expectations or to surprise people. I would do it because I think it would be a good story. I think it would actually be a good thing. And yeah, and as someone pointed out in chat, you could keep having Barrett in flashbacks. It's not like the actor or the character has to leave the narrative just because they're dead. There's ways to do things with that. But anyways, real quick. I want to say, unfortunately, and I have to say it that way, unfortunately, there is way too much in fiction in general, in Hollywood, in television, in movies and books and games. There's way too much emphasis on the twist, I think. And I think that's exactly the attitude you're talking about, Mike, is they gotta have the twist, otherwise what's the point? Where would the power of the game be if there was no big twist?
Well, there is one.
It's funny because most people who haven't played Final Fantasy VII don't know the twist. They don't know about Cloud.
God, yeah.
And for the rest of us who wanted to re-experience it, despite the fact that we know it, it's fine.
Yeah.
But for everyone who hadn't played it, the twist, and that's the other thing. that bothered me hugely. I'll be quick with this one, but they just like constantly point at the fact that something's wrong with Cloud. I mean, there's no subtlety in it.
Yeah.
And then you have Hojo who like tells him to his freaking face,
You weren't a soldier.
It's like
pissed me off so much.
Yeah.
what is happening here? Like they in my opinion, and I did another video on this about how brilliant that plot twist is, the twist and then the retwist of Cloud was not in Soldier, and then he was a Sephiroth clone, but no, he really was there when he takes off the helmet. I watch people experiencing that for the first time to this day, and just the shock and the awe.
That's
one of my favorite moments
actually,
in all of gaming. No joke.
That's actually one of my favorite twists in video games.
Ever. And everyone talks about the big impactful moment of FF7 being Aerith's death.
No.
That was not the case for me. That was shocking. That was terrible. But when Cloud takes off his helmet in that flashback, and you realize he was there all the time, and you see all the breadcrumbs that were left, and you put the pieces together, it was so technically sound from a storytelling standpoint. It just made perfect sense. It was like, that is obviously the answer, not what Sephiroth told me. The only reason that worked is because they made you trust and believe in Cloud through the Midgar arc and into the first retelling of the Nibelheim incident. They made you trust him. They made him the guy who explains the tutorial for equipping materia. He's the one who gives the tutorial. He's the one they always turn to when they need answers, when they're like, what's going on here? Cloud, explain this to us. It's like probably 2 or 3 times in the game that everyone turns to him. They make him the authority on everything Shinra and Soldier. So that when they then tell you, nope, he was never in Soldier, he's not who he says he is, it was like, hold on, what?
Yep.
And then the reversal of that was even more crazy. And the fact that they literally, like all the time, are pointing in the remake at the fact that there's something wrong with him. There's something, and even the characters. I think Tifa turns to Aerith and is like, "Is he okay? Do you think Cloud's all right?" Like they're all suspicious. It ruins it, and I don't know. I don't even know if that matters anymore, because I don't even know if the story's going to follow the same course of events at all, given the ending. Now that they've freed themselves to do whatever they want, but there's so many problems with the storytelling here. If the goal was to recreate, the original experience of Final Fantasy VII, be faithful to that, like they continued to say that it was all the way through interviews leading up to this, but it doesn't appear to be the case. And so this is why, again, it's not a remake of Final Fantasy VII. It's a complete sequel that relies on the audience's intimate familiarity with the original work. And I can't believe that that's the direction they went. I was so surprised. I was like baffled by it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Like, even if my theory about this being a direct sequel to Advent Children is not true, as you say, one way or another, thematically, this is a clear sequel to FF7 original. And that's undeniable, unavoidable. That's already set in stone.
Yeah.
The ghosts. I was going to finish talking about the ghosts. I'm sorry. Let me wrap
go
this
for
up
it.
quick.
I went way off tangent.
We got a little bit off a tangent there. I've scheduled out my day for this. I got time. I don't know what your guys' schedule are.
Yeah.
I'm totally free.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I'm not doing anything,
Okay. So I was going to say, do we have to... Yeah, by the way, you like the music choice? It's been spot on so far, hasn't it? We're playing FF7 music. I know you guys can't hear it.
Oh, nice.
Anyways, hopefully, by the way, you can hear Mike and Rax better. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off the ducking. That's my fault. I thought I'd turn it off, but I actually have to turn off both sides of the ducking, so my bad. Hopefully they're more audible now. Let me get to the ghosts. So, you know what? Let me actually tie this into Doom Eternal. Let's just go ahead and jump onto that one, shall we? So, I'm about to spoil Doom Eternal for anybody who doesn't want to have that spoiled. This is the big spoiler of Doom Eternal. Okay.
I'll give you a thumbs up when he's done.
Yeah, okay. Giving people a few seconds to hit mute or pause or whatever. Spoiler. All right. Doom Eternal is a direct sequel to Doom 4, is a direct sequel to Doom N64, is a direct sequel to Doom 2, is a direct sequel to Doom 1. That's the big spoiler. Doom Eternal ties the Doom series, except for 3, into one cohesive narrative. And it does a good job of it, in my opinion. It was actually one of the better parts of the narrative, because the overall plot of Doom Eternal was actually really dumb. But that connection, the way that they tied that up together was awesome. Now, FF7R1 is trying to connect FF7, Crisis Core Before Crisis, On the Way to a Smile, Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, and this together. So the connection becomes apparent immediately. Why the music's loud? Oh, that's probably because I took off the ducking. I can't. Let's do that. That's as quiet as it gets. It's that or no music. So the...
Oh yeah, I think he's done with spoilers.
The connection is obvious. Do they mention anything from Dirge? I mean, other than the H and the G thing and the deep ground parallels. But anyways, moving on. This, it feels... God, how do I have like 5 thoughts about this, and I'm trying to jump into which one first. The problem is, I'm big on continuity. Anybody who knows me knows I am huge on continuity. However, I am huge on continuity that works. I'm huge on continuity that is well designed. I'm huge on continuity that fits together and makes me go, yeah! That makes me care more. I've always said that I could replace the word continuity with the word investment, because that's what it really is about for me. You have me invested in what's going on, and now you're seeing the consequences of it. And that's awesome to me from a consumer, developer, creator, writer perspective, is to see what happens. But the problem is that has to be planned out or very carefully improved. I've talked many times before about the difference between front-loaded storytelling and back-loaded storytelling. And really quick, for those of you who've never heard it, front-loaded is you planned it all in advance. Back-loaded is you made it up as you went. Now, both have validity, and both can be done well. But if you're going the continuity route, front-loaded will always work better. Which brings me to my point. This is incredibly backloaded. Very obviously backloaded.
Yeah.
But again, even ignoring that, because I've seen good backloaded storytelling. I've seen it quite a bit. I just gave you an example. Doom Eternal. That was not planned out. They made that up on the fly, and they made it frickin' work. But that's the key part. In my opinion, this is pure opinion, this shouldn't be connected in the ways that it is. Now, give me 1 second. I'm okay. I actually said this very early on. I was relating this to Chrono Trigger. Remember that? Right at the beginning, like right when we hit Sector 7, I was talking about Chrono Trigger and how you could connect Chrono Trigger and FF7 and how we do it narratively and how we could make those connections happen, because there was several thematic connecting points. We actually talked about FF6 there as well. But the relevant point is you have to really sit and think about how to connect those threads. Otherwise, you have freaking Shinra from FF10-2 getting a cameo in FF7. Did you catch that, by the way, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I've been... Again, that connection, right, that they made between FF10-2 and FF7 back in whenever FF10-2 came out, and there was that interview with Katase. Again, that... And I'll explain this later, because I want you to keep going. I don't want to keep interrupting you, but... I just find that to be so anti Final Fantasy, against the spirit of Final Fantasy, to tie these things together this way. And so, like, seeing that it just hurts me to see how completely, like, head first they have dove into the deep end of being committed to sequels and tying different Final Fantasy games together and all that. So, anyways.
I have to jump in and really quick, because it sounds like you actually didn't see what I'm talking about. In FF7R1, there's a picture of the founding of Shinra.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you knew about it. Yeah.
And he's got the mask on.
They have the friggin' I hope to God that's an Easter egg, because holy crap.
I want to believe it is.
The reason I bring that up specifically is because that is exactly what I mean when I am about good continuity, when I'm about continuity actually mattering and having a connection that is relevant or significant. I hate to keep spoiling other things, so very minor Zelda spoilers here, but there's a reason why Zelda Wind Waker connects so smoothly to Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's because they looked at those connecting threads and they said, okay, what's the consequence of Ocarina? How can we make this matter? How can we tie these things together? And they did, and they made Wind Waker, and it was awesome, right? Yeah. This feels like they were like, okay, we've got a bullet point. We've got a list of bullet points, and these are the specific things we have to tie in. So we'll just shove them in as hard brutally as we possibly can, with no thought to where they might fit. Because I know you and I, Mike, are actually going to disagree on this, but I think this could have been made contiguous and worked. I think they could have made this work.
I actually think in some ways it does. So I'm interested to see in the ways that you don't think it works.
Well, to move on really quick, this is why this is so connected to the ghosts thing. Sorry, I swear, one of these days I'll stop talking about the ghosts, because I feel that the ghosts are the most crude storytelling tool I've seen in the last 5 years. It's literally the GM walking down in the middle of the D&D session and being like, all right, hang on. No, he's actually supposed to be over here, and he's supposed to be over there. Okay, go ahead, continue. It is crude. It is brusque, and there's no subtlety to it whatsoever. We all, even ignoring the fact that I called the 2009 thing very, very quickly on, all of us immediately figured out what was going on with the ghosts right from the word go, because they all so overtly interfered in things.
Yeah, it's very on the nose.
Yeah, it's incredibly on the nose, which is generally considered to be bad writing, and for good freaking reason.
Yeah,
it's just so that's why I prefaced this whole thing. We've been talking like 20 minutes about this, about what would you say if the ghosts were ejected? In other words, trying to maintain the contiguous nature of the work, which I know you're against, but trying to maintain this thing as something that is still connected to the original compilation, and yet is done so in a manner that involves a degree of subtlety rather than oh, by the way, this is how things.
Yeah, it's definitely clumsy. Like, and every time they came around, it felt like you were just getting pulled out of the experience, so to speak. Like you're getting slapped a little bit. I think your analogy to the DM interrupting the experience is pretty apt.
Really quick, Leander, don't do that. Do not ever do that. Don't put words in my mouth, and don't think those kind of things. Just because you disagree does not make you an idiot, and it does not mean there's anything wrong with you liking them. Okay?
So
that is not what we're about around here.
So, when you just had the one playthrough so far, right? Because that's true for me, and I'm probably not going to play it again or on the hard mode. But I have been trying to look at some other people online who've been posting their interpretations or theories of the story, and essentially the one that I guess to me it kind of has started to make sense, which doesn't matter because I just disagree with the premise so much that I don't care if it makes sense or not. But because Sephiroth has time traveled, right? And because his first, I guess, interaction and where he is now messing with events is when he shows up in chapter 2 and Cloud sees him and he follows him into that alley, right? And then it's like right from there that a butterfly effect of sorts has now erupted. And this is why things begin to be a little bit different in this timeline. It's all because of his first interruption to the continuity of that timeline or whatever. Yeah. And so this is when the ghosts emerge. As far as I'm aware. This is when they come out, and this is when they start interacting. I guess that they could have gone about this in a way to where, I don't know how, but where they just feel compelled, and you don't see physical ghosts arriving and fighting them. But if they tried to make it some kind of I just feel compelled to go.
Yeah, just this intuition. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, an intuition. Maybe that could have, I don't know, landed a little better, not felt as clumsy, but like I said, I feel like the premise, I just disagree with that. It's not what I want.
I swear I'll let you
not down with
about
the premise
that
at all.
I swear. Let me finish. I want to say one last thing about the
go
ghosts. I swear. One of these days we'll stop talking about these stupid ghosts. I'm gonna go. I want to go and give my theory. Is that okay? Cool.
Yeah, go for it.
I think so. Okay, there's actually two broad possibilities. One is the most obvious one, and that's what you were just saying. It's what Leander was just saying. These are a form of a weapon which has arisen because he jumped back. And as you pointed out, and as I actually double-checked just last night, things don't start changing until Seth shows up. That is the first really demonstrable change to the story. Everything up until that point could be argued to be a retelling of what we already saw. It's polishing over some details, but basically it is the exact same beats. Then Seth shows up, things start to alter, and a lot of Seth's dialogue, this is also why I say this is so clearly the post-Advent Children Sephiroth, because what he says, and, this is important, his manner of speech is very clearly the Sephiroth who's already lost, as I like to say.
Yeah.
Again, tying this
Advent
into Wind
Children
Waker.
Sephiroth.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so they come out as a direct consequence of him, and he kind of keeps provoking periodically in order to make them come out until finally he can convince them to, that is to say, the party, to defeat the weapon, ergo, and then he very clearly and very obviously absorbs the weapon. That happens during the ending, right before you fight him. And now he has that power and starts using it if you're paying attention afterwards. This is one of the reasons I say that there are sequences of that do line up logically, because it's clear that at that point he was like, all right, okay, now I have the power of this weapon. I have the power to prevent anyone from altering the timeline, and I can do whatever the hell I want with this. And thus, the freedom line. Oh, the terrible freedom sky of who knows what could happen. I already missed the steel sky thing, blah, 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 blah. Now, that's the most obvious and most logical thing. But I gotta say, honestly, I think, and this is pure theory crafting, it's more likely that ghosts and the weapon don't actually exist in the strictest sense of the word. I think they are literally just expressions of Sephiroth. I think they are something he has produced and has been using to shove the party into a certain direction this time around. I still think he's the Advent Children Seph. But I think there's several signs of... How do I phrase this? Okay, in my opinion, either this is bad writing, or there are signs of them pushing the party, but not pushing the way they should. In short, there are many instances, and I notice this throughout the game, where they will be like, oh, don't do this, and they'll only try once. And then then the party keeps going. Why don't they try again? Why don't they continue to push? Why don't they continue to try and push fate into the Destiny's line or whatever? That makes a lot more sense if they are basically nothing more than something Sephiroth is himself using as a tool in order to try and push the party along these lines, to demonstrably and noticeably alter the timeline. My opinion.
Could be.
Yeah.
I
don't know if that makes it better.
To me, it doesn't, but we know where I stand. So.
Yeah.
I'm kind of starting to lean with Mike on this one. The entire premise of like the ghosts and the time travel is utterly flawed.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But anyways, that's all I got about the ghosts, I swear. I do have to bring this up just because it's been posited. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Several people have posited the theory, and I myself have posited the theory that... You remember that old terrible theory about FF7 where the whole game is actually flash forward?
I don't think I've heard that one.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so it's really basic. At the very, 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 very end of the ending, right before the credits roll, there's this shot of Eris looking into the Maka
how she
thing.
bookends.
So and I mean,
Yeah.
I always thought that was a bookend and nothing's literal, but several people gave the idea that Squall's dead. I mean, that Eris has actually seen the whole game as a vision.
Yeah.
And the theory is basically that this follows that
she saw the future,
Yep.
so to speak, and that's why she knows all the stuff that she shouldn't know in this game.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Really
In my
don't like
opinion,
that theory.
it's one of
all
the dumbest.
so dumb.
It's one of the dumbest
All of
theories
it.
the fandom has ever come up with.
All of it is so dumb.
Listen.
I
Link is
just
dead.
can't.
Squall is dead.
I can't.
What's
with
another? Oh yeah, Renoa is Ultimecia. What other theories do I not like here? I'm sorry. Ignoring my own personal opinion on the matter, I've actually given that some real thought because it's my job. And after some thought, I don't actually think that lines up rather neatly because it basically only explains one thing away: Eris's knowledge. It doesn't explain anything about Sephiroth. It doesn't explain anything about the Whispers. It doesn't explain anything about clearly the Advent Children trio. It doesn't explain anything else whatsoever. So I think at best that's just a convenient connection and isn't actually a conduit. That's just my opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
So now we've got over that. Like I said, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that. I was going to talk more about the gameplay thing, but I know, Mike, you're more into story in general. So if you want, I can skip over that. That's up to you.
No, let's talk about gameplay.
All right,
I have a
right.
lot to say about that too.
Because, I mean, I like to say this periodically. Some people tend to forget that it's lore runner. I'm story and gameplay. I'm big on both, and I've studied game design since I was a kid. I feel after going, I started off the game enjoying the combat, and by the end I didn't. And it's taken me a long time to really process the whys. And ultimately, I can't say that there's one big reason. It's more like they didn't how do I phrase this? In order to make this kind of a system work, they had to manually craft every single aspect of the system, which includes the level presentation and layout, the specific combats, the enemy design, the boss design, the nature of how the difficulty works. Yes, I have played hard mode. No, I don't enjoy it that much, but I'll get into that later. They had to manually craft a lot of things precisely to follow through with the core combat concept. And I don't think they did that. It is possible that'll get polished in the future. Who knows? But I do think as of right now, if you wanted to make a big sweeping change, and this leads me to my question, if you wanted to shuffle more towards ARPG or more towards TRPG, which would you prefer and why?
Go ahead first, Rex.
Okay. I would definitely go a bit more towards the TRPG, or rather TBRPG aspects, because I think that the action game stuff, it works well enough, but there are certain parts where my ATB will be interrupted, my limit break will be interrupted, my limit break will hit an HP gate and not do any more damage. And that stuff just kind of pisses me off.
And the stagger bar's empty. Don't forget that.
Stagger bar's emptied. I've had some problems with the resource management when it comes to like ATB. Like you have to keep slashing to build it up. It's just, I think that speed up the ATB a bit, make the white damage, so to speak, not necessarily tied to that. And I'd be more in favor of this hybrid system that they're going with.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you guys said. Like all the issues that you had were issues that I had too.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been fascinated with the idea of finding this hypothetical...
Finding the hybrid that they've been looking for. Yeah.
They've been searching for and hell-bent on creating for the last 2 decades or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I have also been interested in that. But I think the longer and longer that I see them going on, the more and more I think that it might just not really be possible.
Yeah, they're not going to hit it, I don't think,
But this did get really close in a couple of ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that if they had fixed the ATB being a timed thing rather than where you have to actually engage in regular attacks and then switch to another character and make them do it and switch to another, they force you into character switching this way, which I think was the intention of this.
Oh, absolutely.
They wanted you to be switching around all the time,
and I
right?
hate it.
So that you...
Yeah, I can't stand it. I think, I seriously think if you just standardize the ATB speed and just said, okay, here, just use your abilities when they come off cooldown, so to speak.
Yeah, and
why not,
It's about offering player choice rather than forcing you into a certain play style, right? Mm-hmm. So it would have been nice to choose from time to time, or if I wanted to play the game the way that I wanted to or whatever, to just control one guy, pull up the command menu, hit R2, tell them to do their thing and move on.
Exactly.
That would have been nice to do sometimes. However, I still think they could have incentivized the player to character switch if, say, they had something kind of more like Xenoblade Chronicles, where abilities are more effective from a certain position around the enemy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So from behind or on the side. So that I could tell Barrett, use Big Shot if I wanted to, but if it's more effective from behind, I'm going to switch to him and move him to a strategic position and then do it.
I think Final Fantasy XIV actually does something similar, and I'm totally in agreement.
I think that would have been better.
I was just say really quick, if you paid attention, several of their weapons, most notably Tifa's, actually do more damage from the rear of the enemy, which she will never do on her own right. She will never actually fix that.
And that's the part
I never actually caught that.
Yeah,
is that the AI, especially Cloud, I've noticed, if you're not controlling him, he just walks around holding his sword up and blocking nothing.
What's so bad about a gambit system?
Yes, a gambit system would be awesome too. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be as complex as FF12's gambit system.
No, do something maybe Kingdom Hearts-ish or Secret of Mana-ish. Just give some level of control.
Something.
And to toss into that, I agree with you completely. I just want to add an even additional frustration there. FF10-2, I think, has the best ATB system we've had to date, in my opinion, from a pure combat perspective. But the big flaw of FF10-2 is positioning matters, but you have no control over it.
Yes.
And that is the exact same problem I have here. I mean, I know you can move around the battlefield, but you really don't actually have mobility in the strictest sense in FF7R1. You have the ability to move slowly. You have the ability to do the dodge rolls, which have no iframes whatsoever. And you have no ability to position or jump or anything. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I was frustrated on the Leviathan fight, for example. It's like, okay, I need to get around... The fight's so obvious. There's these pillars. They block spells. I'm trying to get around them to hit him at a distance. And I literally physically couldn't move quickly enough to position myself to hit him properly. And I finally just said, screw it.
Yeah. That it was, and I think you guys brought this up too, but where you could be interrupted, where a spell cast could be interrupted and you would lose. It would be fine if you could get hit and interrupted as long as they stood up and then cast it.
Yep.
But Final Fantasy 13 actually does that, you know?
Yeah.
It keeps the thing in ATB.
Yeah, it's in Q.
No.
FF10-2 does that too, actually.
You take damage, you lose your ATB, and you lose the MP, even though you didn't cast the spell.
Yep.
And to me, that creates a major design flaw for hard mode. Because you can't
use items to restore your MP.
So it's like your level 3 spells, it's not even worth risking trying that because it takes so long to cast.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the rebuttal that I've heard to that I potentially agree with, but I'm not going to play the game enough to get good to try this, is that, you know, it's designed for you to really recognize the patterns of the enemy's attacks and look for the windows so that you know, okay, I have this much time in the window. I'm going to use my level 2 spell, not my level 3 spell. And that getting better at recognizing, I could understand that maybe that's the intention, and I could be okay with that, but I still would prefer that they just stand up after they get knocked down and just cast the freaking spell that I told them to cast.
Exactly.
If I might say, now granted, I've only played hard mode last night and this morning, but near as I can tell, that is more or less mandatory in hard mode. Because as you say, Thundagas, any Agas rather, cast. It's like a 2.5 second cast time, which is an eternity in a game like this. You basically can't unless you are really, really ready for it and know exactly when to hit them. You have to know enemy movements and you have to know when they're going to hit, because duh. If I could add one last thing here as well, I mean, obviously the ATB thing and the mobility thing, all that. Probably the thing that irritated me most personally from a pure emotional perspective is that almost every enemy in the game has something that knocks you over or knocks you down, and then it takes you about 1.5 seconds to get up.
Yep.
And that is such a non-stop thing and very irritating, because effectively what the game is forcing you to do, and before any of you correct me in chat, I do know this, is you have to block, and you have to block in the right way, and you have to block at the right time.
Yeah.
Especially on hard mode. But the fact that the game, again, it, like you were saying, Mike, this is basically the game telling you this is how to play, otherwise screw you, is something that I, at best, can consider neutral, because I'm not in favor of that type of game design.
Right.
Yeah.
I also really wish, talking about blocking, right, because rolling or dodging a lot of times doesn't really work because the enemies track you with spells or with the Sahajins. When they jump, they just track you wherever you roll, so they're going to hit you no matter what. So the game does essentially tell you through this that blocking is what you're supposed to do.
Yep.
So please add a canceling feature so that when I'm in the middle of my combo that I can't cancel out of, and I see the attack coming from a mile away, let me just hit the R button and cancel out the block. If they added that, if they changed the ATB, and if they had a little bit more of the strategic positioning with this ability is more effective from this position, I think I would have been in love with this.
Yeah,
I think
same
I agree
here
with that, actually. That's probably why I enjoyed it so much early on, because those issues hadn't really started to show up.
Yeah, they don't rear their head until later, definitely.
Yeah, when the bosses get a lot harder and they're more aggressive and they do a lot more.
Now, hang on. I do want to give, as I'm just bashing the hell out of the combat, I do want to say one thing. This is just my opinion, but the Rufus fight was awesome.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Easily my favorite fight in the entire game. And I think, this is my opinion, but part of the reason why is because it was specifically designed to be a pay attention to fight that didn't penalize you too much for not paying attention, but also... Okay, hang on, let me rewind for a second. First of all, it was designed to be a duel fight. And I think that says a lot. As soon as you eject the other party members, the combat suddenly got a lot more interesting because they weren't being a waste over there. But
yeah, that's sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you for very long, but that's actually what Nomura shines at, in my opinion. Every single one of his fights that are one-on-one, perfect.
I would agree. And Kingdom Hearts 3 is a perfect example of that, honestly.
Mhm.
But the other thing I wanted to mention, too, in the one... If you hit him improperly, he counterattacks. But this is important. This is very important. You still hit him. That's important because, in my opinion, from a game design perspective, if you make an enemy who has to be defeated in a certain way, and they do it artificially, like imagine if he was just straight invuln, he just canceled out the damage and then hit you back, that would actually drift over into irritating territory. And again, I hate to bring Doom Eternal back into this, but Marauders. Marauders are straight invuln unless you hit them in the right way or get the right counterattack there. And I do mean straight invuln. Like there's no reaction there. They have a flag that makes them immune to damage unless you hit them the right way. That's irritating. Rufus, at least, I could hit anytime I screwed up because it was usually a screw up. Like I twitched too much, right? I saw him doing something. I was like, oh, he's reloading. Yeah, no, he wasn't actually reloading. But it's not like okay, we're okay. But anyways, I just wanted to mention that positivity thing because the next thing I want to talk about is the dungeon design.
Yep.
Oh God, why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just shush. Dungeon design, go.
Okay, so here was my sort of underlying observation as I was playing through the game, right?
Yeah.
And this relates to like what classifies as a remake for me. When you look at the baseline, underlying structure, the design philosophy of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you realize that behind the scenes, co-director Toriyama
Yeah.
was in charge of game design. That was like his wheelhouse on this.
Yeah.
You begin to see these striking similarities with Final Fantasy 13.
Yeah.
I think you and I are actually of one mind on 13, Mike. I've seen your videos on it. You've probably seen mine.
Yeah.
It's funny because
Go
sorry.
ahead, Rex, go ahead.
The final dungeon, actually, I mentioned that it just bore too many similarities to Taijin's Tower from 13, in my opinion.
Yeah. Like, I will say this, and largely our feeling on this game is negative. I'm assuming everyone has recognized this by now, but I do want to say that this is improved from what we saw in Final Fantasy 13. The dungeons aren't as long.
Oh, hell
and they're
no.
not as boring, and they're not as carbon copy hallway after hallway, leading to fight, run, fight, run, fight, run, fight, run,
would
fight,
agree
with no
completely.
diversion whatsoever.
Yeah.
I saw at least an effort here to insert some mini games to break things up a little bit with the hand on the way to Sector 6 that you give Aerith a ride on to go get the materia over here, and then ride over here and kick the ladder down so I can.
Or like
continue
the
on.
stupid pump thing, or
The pump box in the sewers, yeah, things like that. That was one of the things that I criticized the most about Final Fantasy 13. It's like it's not that it's linear.
It doesn't have any
game design's not
variation.
bad. Yeah, it's 2 hours, a 2-hour dungeon of doing nothing but running straight forward and fighting the same enemy grouping like 500 times, and that just gets really old.
And to be clear, real quick, I just see several people in chat saying this. Yes, FFs have always been linear.
Yeah.
Just
Yes,
to acknowledge that the linearity itself isn't the problem. It's
what you
linearity
do
is
with
used.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, 3 of my favorite games growing up were the Prince of Persia trilogy, and those games are extremely guided and linear, but the difference is they have this nice blend of puzzle solving, combat, platforming, and charming storytelling. And you do one or the other for 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and then you're doing the other type of thing. You're not just like running straight, doing wall running for 2 hours. That would become incredibly boring. And that was the problem with FF13. So I just want to say it's not nearly that bad here. I would say that this feels kind of like an evolved and improved formula for Toriyama here. So it's much better than that.
Yeah.
But
I've actually said, go ahead, finish up.
I was just going to say, but I still just fundamentally disagree with that philosophy. I don't think that makes for a particularly fun game, especially in dungeon design. I feel like they go on way too long, and they really hurt the pacing of the game in a major way. And this was most obvious to me after you get dropped into the sewer by Don Corneo. And
kidding.
What was originally a 2-screen sewer, one screen where you get dropped down, you go down a ladder, into another screen, you go up and you're in the train graveyard. That's now more than an hour-long dungeon. The train graveyard was also 2 screens. Larger, takes a little bit longer because there's lots of treasure you can get, but 2 screens. They turned that into more than an hour-long dungeon. This is all while the characters are desperate to get up to Sector 7 because they know they have to warn everybody that the plate's going to be dropped. And they're sitting around here messing around with this ghost kid in this warehouse and wasting a lot of time. And it really kills the pacing of the game.
I would agree.
So that was my major criticism of this game, is instead of going to what made the structure and formula of the original Final Fantasy VII special and like highlighting those things in a remake, Toriyama just said, I'm just going to make Final Fantasy 13 2.0. I'm going to improve on what I do. And that's not what I was expecting or what I wanted from a Final Fantasy VII remake. I didn't hear remake and go, yeah, I can't wait to play a Final Fantasy 13 evolved game. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So that was really disappointing.
If I could add one thing before I go into my actual thoughts on the dungeon design really quick. Just those of you who don't really know me, I have a system where I give a positive or a negative to anything that I consider a major increase or decrease to my enjoyment of a game. That's the core of the review system I use. The ending got 3 negatives total. The dungeon design got 5 negatives across story and gameplay. And it really does boil down to that padding thing, as I mentioned earlier, and as you mentioned, as almost everyone in chat has been saying, it's all about the pacing and the padding and the filler, which brings me to the big point I wanted to talk about. What do you want to bet that, because I have a theory about this, and I stand by this. What do you want to bet they designed the game and built out the game and said, this is 8 hours long? And then so they were like, okay, so let's stretch out the dungeons, let's do that, and they spent time and effort and work and trying to do it. And as you pointed out, Mike, and this is in the interest of fairness, they did something with the dungeons. They're still pretty boring and they're still pretty padding, but they put work into it. And then they looked and they said, well, now this is a 12-hour game. Shoot. Okay.
Yeah, we got to stretch it to 40 hours.
It again, because, and I could go off on the game duration argument for literally hours. Let's just say really quick, I get it. I really do. It's an unfortunate but valid metric of game design and game marketing. You notice this very game was marketed as a full-scale game, 40-plus hour game. That was part of the marketing spiel, because that's so baked into gaming culture in general. But again, I don't want to get off that topic. The point is, what do you want to bet that with the dungeon design, that was the first delay, and then what do you want to bet with the side quests, that was the second delay? Because, and I pointed this out several times, the side quests were basically procedural with voice acting. And I don't want to sound dismissive, but
it felt like I was playing Final Fantasy 15 again.
Yeah, it's canned animation, canned camera angle, basic quest design. And then you go turn in. The return in thing was nice. I gave that a positive. It was a good feature. You know, and you go back and turn in, and then you have canned animations and canned camera angles. The only thing that made them not fully procedural is the fact that they actually had voice acting, surprisingly good voice acting, to help flesh them out.
Yeah.
But sorry, I was just going to say, I almost guarantee that both the dungeon and the side quest things, both of which I had significant issues with, are there to make the game longer and for no other reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I mostly agree with this, and I felt like at least half of the playtime, the total playtime of the game, was spent either in dungeons that didn't exist in the original, or if you were doing the side quests in the side quests. Those are optional, of course, but still, if this accounts for what adds up to the 30 to 40 hour playtime, whereas it probably would only be 15 without those. But here's where it probably gets real controversial in terms of like just what I know about people who like RPGs.
Hmm.
I prefer an RPG to be 20 hours.
Holy crap! There's another one.
So it's 3 of us now. All 3 of us agree on that.
Chrono Trigger's length is perfect.
Which is about a 14-hour game, by the way, for those of you at home.
Yeah, I mean, if you really know what you're doing, you're going to beat that way less than 20 hours. But unlike a first or a relaxed playthrough or whatever, it's about 20-ish.
Yeah.
Everything in there is relevant. Every quest is pertinent to the story. Everything feels like it belongs. None of it's padding. I would way rather have that than even my second favorite game, The Witcher 3, which is hundreds of hours long. And they do a really good job of making the content that they're repeating over and over again have meaning, because they tell lots of good stories with their questing. The questing is where the game shines, but still, you're doing the tracking over and over again. You're doing the same exact things, and they just drag that out. What would be probably a 25-hour experience into hundreds of hours by just repeating things, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason. That is literally the reason why The Witcher 3 is number 2 and not number 1 for me, because Chrono Trigger is so perfectly paced.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
And
wait to review
Final
that.
Fantasy VII was also a very well-paced game, especially through the Midgar arc.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they have freaking butchered it with this ridiculous lengths of the dungeons and with side content that has seemingly nothing to do. They certainly don't tell any interesting stories. Well, maybe there's 1 or 2 examples that do.
I was gonna say the
But
Angel of the Slums. I liked that arc. That was
that one.
That
That's
was fine.
That's why I wanted to retract a little bit, because that one was pretty good.
Yeah.
But why is a mercenary trying to track down a 5-year-old's cats that are missing?
Exactly.
Why? Why? Like, why would he do that? It makes no sense. If he's going to go kill the Doom Rats, that makes sense. But he's not, like, it's crazy. Why is he going to track down a Chocobo Ranger's lost birds instead of going to save Aerith?
Mm-hmm.
Because she's been captured and everyone feels guilty because they feel like they're partly responsible.
Yeah, I know it's
I don't
important that we
understand.
have to go save Aerith, but these people need help.
Honestly, the one if I could just jump in really quick, I hate to bash the game even more, but the section where the pacing hurt the most for me was the Wall Market section. I tried really hard to shut up about it because my chat started getting tired of me. It's constantly like, oh god, Tifa's in trouble. Okay, so let's do some side quests, and let's go do the Coliseum, let's do more side quests, then let's go do this other thing, then we gotta get... Then you go through like 2 hours, 3 hours of stuff before Cloud even gets to the point of being willing to accept dressing up. That's not even on the table yet. And this whole time, Tifa's in danger, and it's like... Okay, whatever. I'm done. Someone asked earlier, hang on, I want to jump in really quick here. Did I walk away with a net positive or net negative from FF7R1? And I want to ask you guys that first. I think, Mike, your answer will be really quick and simple.
The answer is no.
Okay, we're good. Rex, what's your answer?
So I'm kind of 2 minds on that. The parts that were faithful, definitely, I walked away positively inclined towards that kind of stuff. The new stuff, definitely not. Overall, I'm just scared. I'm just scared for what they're going to do, you know?
Yeah.
I do want to add to that real quick, though, that while I walked away with a net negative, I still think it is an incredibly competently made game with tons of polish.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I can admit that a game is brilliant and still not like to play it. A great example for me is Half-Life 2. I've never been able to really enjoy playing Half-Life 2 personally, but I can like look at that and analyze it and see like this was like a freaking amazing game, and it's very well designed.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree with so many underlying design principles of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and there are things about it that irritated me. But I would not call this a terrible game, right? It's obviously well designed. It's more of a complete product than Final Fantasy 15 was.
Yeah.
So
That's not really a good metric, but okay.
Well, I'll say this was a complete game. It felt that way. Final Fantasy 15 did not. So what I'm saying is that it's a step up above that. So by saying that I came in with a net negative is just because I personally disagreed with a lot of what was there. not because it's like I find it inherently bad or terrible or something like that. So I just want to clarify.
Yeah, no, that is a good thing to keep in mind, because especially since both of you are going to hate me for this one, because looking at my net score, it's plus 18
we
plus 3.
lost him to a mute here.
Oh,
I think so.
hang on, I can fix that. Sorry about that.
Oh, there you go.
Anyways, to repeat what I just said. You're both going to hate me for this, but my overall score for this game is plus 18 to story net, plus 3 to gameplay net. And if I'm being honest, a lot of that is part of... A lot of that is because of the presentation. I really think there was a lot of polish in the main sequences of the game, and I mean a lot. The voice acting, the motion capture, the attention to detail, the camera usage, the way that scenes were structured compared to other scenes, the way that they fleshed out the main cast. As I already mentioned before, this is actually my favorite Barrett right here, bar none.
Yeah.
They really, really nailed Barrett. They nailed Tifa. They nailed Eris. Wedge was awesome. Jesse was enjoyable. I love what they did with Hojo. This might be the perfect presentation of Hojo.
They got Cloud right for the first time since 1997.
Yeah.
Yep.
They actually got
Just to
Cloud
give you
right.
guys an idea.
That was a big one too.
I totally agree that they nailed the characters aside from Sephiroth. They got everyone else right.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
And that's why I have to say this is still a net positive for me. I kind of agree with you on many of the negative things, but I do think this is important to keep in mind that for all of my complaints, this is still a net positive game for me. And I want to point that out there because there's still people on the internet who don't understand that concept. I can complain about something and speak negatively about something and still enjoy it and still praise it. And I know that sounds duh, but it needs to be stated.
You telling me the world is not black and white?
I know it's crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts.
But
oh my god.
You're telling me there's nuance to opinions?
If you want a bullet point, I would say this game reminds me a lot of FF10, 10-2, and 12. Very good games with very severe flaws.
Yep.
Or as I was talking about during the review series, flawed masterpieces. There is a genuine and legitimate amount of care put into this game, in my opinion, and it shines most clearly in the characters. I think that's really what drags this one so high up for me.
Yeah, I really think that's probably what they did best in the whole game. And that and Materia, I really liked how they handled Materia too. But
I'd say characters. Most of the music, some of it I wasn't really down with. Especially the
main
the Oppressed.
Sector 7.
That, but also the Oppressed. What they did with that.
Oh, that's horrible.
Really
Oppressed people.
I don't want to get into that.
In a vacuum, the soundtrack is all right. Sometimes it just doesn't fit, though. You know,
it's well produced. It's really well produced, and
it's probably Hamauzu's best work. If I had to actually say something about that.
Yeah, I have defended Hamauzu's style. Say for like FF13, a lot of people don't like his style for a Final Fantasy game. And while I see the argument, I've defended it because I like his style. I really liked the tracks he did in FF10, for instance. I'm a big fan of his. But that music, that airy synth and heavy pad sort of like style does not work in the slums of Midgar at all, in my opinion. Nope. And you hear that a lot, and it's just like, man, this doesn't work for me at all here.
Although to push out there, just to throw some positivity there too, this is my favorite themes, plural, because there's like 5 of them, of the Shinra theme, bar none. Like,
absolutely.
The way they did the Shinra theme and the Mako reactor theme were just...
Oh, I actually disagree with that.
Really?
Because...
Yeah, I saw your comment about the Mako reactor theme. You didn't care for it?
And here's the reason why. Like, they put a really heavy orchestral emphasis on a lot of the themes that they brought from the original into this.
Right.
And the cyberpunk techie industrial feel, especially of that piece, I feel is really missing from this version, where you have like that synthy.
I could absolutely see that.
And even the leads are carried by synth through part of that, and then they have that wonderful choral fill. And that it's not a bell, it's like a...
I know the thing you're talking
anvil,
about.
Anyways, whatever the instrument is, that it's so iconic to like the feel of Shinra, and it wasn't in this. And so I kind of felt like it missed the mark a little bit there.
I actually do agree with you. I still like the song, but I do actually agree with your complaint.
Yeah, I think it's not as good as the original for that particular rendition, but
the Shinra
I do
theme-
still enjoy it.
I think like the battle theme was awesome.
Mhm.
The reorchestration of the battle theme was
The
great.
fact that they made like 10 versions of the battle theme is incredible, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they did that a lot too. That's another thing I like. The music direction was mostly good. Like Tifa's really sad theme when they're going through, like they pushed Tifa's theme into a minor key and had it really quiet and slow paced during the Sector 7 rubble sequence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, little stuff like that. Or when you're fighting, I think it's Rufus actually, and Shinra's theme is actually the combat battle you're playing. You know, combat music you're playing there, and the way they use Genova's tune, the Genova melody as Hojo's theme, things like that. I do appreciate the multiple takes thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, oh yeah.
I also,
I'm sorry.
speaking of music, just last thing I'm gonna say about music.
Okay.
The one place where I felt it was terribly misused was during the Sector 7 plate drop.
Oh, don't even get me started on that scene.
We actually both complained about that.
Kind of this generic-y rock kind of feel as they're swinging.
It's butt rock.
They Michael
And
Bay
the
it.
president is looking out the window. Like, what was so great about that in the original is that they cut the music.
Yeah,
And you hear
could
the
hear all the
screams of the
screams.
people.
Yeah,
And then it pulls into the office, and that diegetic like orchestra that he's listening to in the office plays. Like that was so effective. And now they just have this, I don't even know what. It's like this terrible
It's a
rock
Michael Bay
piece playing
sequence.
through.
And I
It's
do mean
awful.
that as an insult. It's a big,
Yeah.
explosive escape. They even showed them, like, going away on the wire through explosions, and as the debris is coming down around them, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Now, that being stated, I do have to mention that the immediate follow-through on that was excellent. But
Yep,
the
with
follow-
Barrett.
Yeah.
yeah.
As usual, Barrett's
Much more impactful than the
star
original
of the
game.
show. But yeah, no, the actual platefall
Right.
itself just made me go, really?
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked a very valid question, which I want to say. So we have a system where we honor proper remakes by giving them a bonus positive to gameplay and story for being a proper remake. No, this does not get one. It's not.
There's
a
too
proper
much
remake.
wrong
I'm glad because I don't see this as a remake at
Well,
all.
it's
just a freaking
not.
sequel.
That's even
Yeah.
ignoring some other reasons I could mention that the core problem here is that this is a sequel. Either it's a literal sequel to Advent Children or it's a thematic sequel to the original. No matter what, this is not a proper remake. Ergo, no. Sorry, but that's. I actually decided that last night. I didn't actually say that out loud. My apologies.
Even if we were to, like you're saying, cut the ghosts out and like get rid of chapter 17 and 18 or whatever, just cut those off, those last 20 minutes, like you were saying. Let's say we did that. It's still bordering that sort of threshold between a reimagining and a remake to me.
Yeah.
It's still, I would have classified it as a remake at that point, with obviously a lot of changes that I may have thought weren't as effective, but I would have classified it as a remake still.
I think I would too, admittedly.
Yeah.
But that ending and the ghosts
See, this
clearly
is why,
make this not a remake.
This is why my first two questions were: what if you got rid of the last 20 minutes, and what if you got rid of the ghosts?
Exactly.
First two
Just
questions.
eject the first two problems, you know?
So now, the next thing I want to address is I'd like to shove the camera up to Mike here. You have mentioned several times that this, against the spirit of Final Fantasy, that this is it. If you don't mind, I'm just going to give you the floor.
All right, you guys ready? Boy, here we go.
Hang on, wait,
Go for it.
let me get my mobile game here. Let me play Final Fantasy VI really quick here. There we go.
Okay, so I was thinking about this a lot. Like this is the culmination of years and years of studying the history of Final Fantasy, of learning about its development history from Final Fantasy I in 1987 all the way up to now, and making retrospectives on them, and doing tons of research and conducting interviews myself over email for things that I was confused about or that seemed contradictory in the interviews. I've been doing this now, these Final Fantasy retrospectives, in one form or another for 10 years it's coming up on. So I've been studying this a lot, and I've been thinking a lot about what is the spirit of Final Fantasy. I did a podcast on that topic a couple weeks ago, but I feel like literally this morning, while I was in the shower, thinking about what I wanted to say on this podcast or on this discussion, I feel like it kind of all came into view for me. I feel like I arrived at my answer for what the spirit of Final Fantasy is. And I'm going to read a couple of quotes from Hironobu Sakaguchi, because it sounds hyperbolic to say that this game, the fact that it's a sequel, the connection, making a connection between Final Fantasy X-2 and FF7, these things are anti-Final Fantasy. People are going to be like, what are you talking about? I totally disagree, but just hear me out. So I think most people know that Hironobu Sakaguchi was very against direct sequels. He hates them. He never ever wanted to have a direct sequel. That was like a big part of his philosophy for this series. He never wanted to do that. So let me read some quotes from him here. This one comes from an interview that's on, I think, like the kind of like behind the scenes features of Final Fantasy X. He says, "We want to give it our all and expend our skills and energy until we can go no further. This is what I consider to be the Final Fantasy." This part of the quote, I think, was taken by Hajime Tabata when he was trying to resolve what he called Final Fantasy disease within the development team making that game, because everyone had a different idea of what is Final Fantasy, right? And he called it, getting back to their challenger roots. And I think this is what he was taking this from, this quote here about expending literally all of your skill, all of your energy, putting absolutely everything you have into this, leaving nothing on the table for a sequel. We put that's actually a quote from Sakaguchi about how he approached Final Fantasy I, the original, was, I am approaching this as if I'm never going to make another game again. I'm not going to save anything for a sequel. Everything's going into this. So that's one part of it. Then he says the stories and characters change each time. This is because stories tend to limit a world. And I think by changing these aspects and creating new material for each title, we try to show our full potential. Keep that in mind, that quote there. Stories tend to limit a world in context of what they're doing with Final Fantasy VII Remake. Right? Like, this is kind of how I feel also that Star Wars has become. As big as that universe felt to us when we watched this as kids, it's actually quite limited. They can't get away from destroying these planet or moon-sized bases that destroy planets. They have to repeat the same things over and over again, right? Okay, here's another quote from him. "I don't like sequels. I hate them. That's why every single Final Fantasy has a new cast of characters, a brand new story, and a different system. Every single game that we make, we are going to give it our all, and then we finish it. We'll end it in such a way that there is no to-be-continued checklist." This is clearly at the philosophy, the base level of the identity of Final Fantasy. And what is very funny, I don't mean funny in a way that where it's actually funny, but it's strange, it's ironic, is that literally the moment that Sakaguchi walked out the door in 2003, his main contention when he was an executive at the company at Squaresoft with Yoichi Wada was that Wada was like, we've just spent all this time and energy and money creating all these assets in this engine. Why are we not reusing them for a sequel? From a business perspective, that makes complete, perfect sense. And it would be baffling why you wouldn't do that. We can maximize our profits this way. But Sakaguchi's artistic integrity, having come up into that executive position from being a creator, was, no, I hate this. This limits the world to do this. It diminishes the product in the end. It diminishes the art. And as soon as Sakaguchi left, they started developing Final Fantasy X-2 and the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. And they started making connections between Final Fantasy X's world and Final Fantasy VII's world. And this is now the philosophy of the company, which is totally antithetical to the creator's intent. And so this is why I say that Final Fantasy has been dead since 2003, in the sense that of the Final Fantasy that I fell in love with. It doesn't exist anymore because it was his philosophy, his formula. Here's another quote from him I want to put up I have a formula from 25 years of experience in the industry, an RPG formula, which is turn-based, a turn-based orthodox JRPG. And this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier with the fact that FF7R's structure, its design is based on Toriyama's philosophy, not on Sakaguchi's. So you're missing an essential piece of the identity of that game, not just from story changes or what have you, but from the game's pacing, from the way it was designed on a baseline level. It doesn't feel like Final Fantasy, at least not traditional Final Fantasy. And what I realized when I was thinking about this is I never really fell in love with Final Fantasy, the brand.
Mm-hmm.
What I fell in love with was Sakaguchi's approach, his ideas, his philosophy on how to make games. And it makes perfect sense that when that person left, I wasn't in love with what these other people were doing with it because I didn't fall in love with their philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say that the entire concept of turning Final Fantasy VII Remake into a sequel is anti-Final Fantasy in that sense, and why I can't get on board with it, knowing what they're trying to do with it moving forward. I can't. It's not what I wanted from a remake. It's not a remake at all. It doesn't try to take the parts of the original that were special and let them shine for a new audience. It's co-opting it and fundamentally transforming it into something different. And I can't consider that a faithful remake. I just can't. So that's what I've been alluding to all this time.
If I could jump in here. First of all, thank you for sharing that. I kept myself muted just to make sure I wouldn't talk over you or interrupt or anything, because I'm unmuted right now, right? Just double checking. Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Two things I want to say about that. One of those is StarCraft, and the other is Empire Strikes Back. As usual, I swear it's related. You want the good or the bad first?
Good. Let's hear some good. We hear some good.
We definitely did hear some good after that.
Empire Strikes Back is not a sequel to Star Wars: A New Hope. Now, hear me out for just a second.
I kind of agree with you, but I think I know where you're going.
I think I know where you're
the
going with
direction I'm
this.
going. It's not Star Wars 2. It's not. It is another Star Wars story. It is another story in the world that was built. In my opinion, that is the kind of approach that could, gotta add that asterisk, work with the Final Fantasy franchise. Don't make FF6 2, right? Make another story that is...
Make another story in the
world
spirit of Final
Fantasy
VI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Make another world, make another story within the... Because you might say, well, they tried to do that with the compilation of... No, they didn't. Every single compilation was directly tied to FF7. It was literally before Crisis Core, FF7, and then On the Way to the Smile and the books, which I can't remember the names of right now, please forgive me, and then it was Advent Children and then Dirge of Cerberus, and there's this one cohesive line. Guys, I can't do anything about my volume without ducking them. That's why I sound quieter. The end. So, so I think that's why I bring up Empire Strikes Back, because Return of the Jedi is a sequel to Star Wars. And I brought this up because this is both me agreeing and disagreeing with you, Mike.
Sure.
Because I think I would be more in favor of FF Empire Strikes Backs than Return of the Jedi's FFs.
Yep.
My opinion.
Well, I can agree with the sentiment because Empire Strikes Back is by far the superior film. So.
I mean,
yeah, no kidding.
But you get the overall point, though. Even though it's following the same characters, it is a different story. It's not a direct sequel. It's in the same way. If I was to continue this, the Thrawn Trilogy. That's where most of us entered the EU, right? The Thrawn Trilogy was not a direct sequel. It was another story that happened to be in Star Wars. It followed the same characters, but it was... Here's another completely self-contained, cohesive, this is one story, right? Like you were talking about with regards to the FF series. It feels echoes of the previous stories. There are consequences that affect it, but the Thrawn Trilogy could work if you've never seen Star Wars.
Sure.
The Empire Strikes Back would work if you never saw A New Hope.
Mhm.
Sure.
And that's the point I wanted to make there. That's the good. Because I think there's a possibility, which they, of course, have not been doing, but I do think the possibility absolutely works. Yeah, Majora's Mask is another perfect example of that. It's the same Link. It happens days after Ocarina of Time, but it is a completely self-contained, segregated story in the same world.
Sure. And I think that, I mean, what you're saying is in congruence with Sakaguchi's reason for hating sequels to begin with, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, if you were to present a sequel to him under these constraints, I don't know if he would resist it quite as much.
I don't know.
Mhm.
Admittedly, I've never met the man, which is a damn shame. I'd love to meet the man someday. But anyways, the bad. I mentioned the bad. That would be, and this is me kind of agreeing with you. The bad is StarCraft. Now, those of you at home who have watched my show at all know that I love StarCraft. I am an overwhelming, huge fan. It's one of my favorite settings. And it's a continued aggravation to me how little we have discussed or showcased or seen of StarCraft, because it's such a fascinating setting in so many different ways. But, and of course, this song fires up now. Of course it frickin' does. StarCraft, we will probably never get a StarCraft remake because we got the StarCraft remaster. Direct parallel, we will probably never get an FF7 remake now. That has basically been removed from the table. And
unless modders mod the PC version.
Yeah, and that sucks.
I wouldn't put it past them, but
Yeah, that sucks so hard.
I know. It's real disappointing.
And that's why I said this is the bad, because I know you were kind of speaking derogatorily towards the executive perspective, and with good reason. But the problem is the money people make the decisions.
Yeah.
And now that there is FF7R1, they'll never make an FF7 remake. If they do, it'll be 20 years from now.
It'll be a completely new generation, totally disconnected from these four people who, let me remind you, worked on the original.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, at this point, it's gone. And that sucks. And this is speaking as someone who does consider this game a net positive. That still sucks that we're never getting that.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is, man. I've been through the 5 stages of grief. I've accepted it.
Yeah, admittedly, I've kind of bounced back and forth when it comes to FF, but I am kind of trending in that direction.
Today, I felt like was my final acceptance. When I was saying,
okay,
I was thinking about this before I showed up, but it's like I was really upset when I first learned about like the ending of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really fired up, and I was like, I'm gonna make a video on this, and it's like over the course of the week and a half or whatever, I've just slowly been like,
Yeah, I've come to terms with it as well.
This is what Final Fantasy is now. It's not ever gonna be what it was, because it can't be. Like, nobody other than Sakaguchi can make a Sakaguchi game. Every creator is gonna have their own way of doing something. And it's not that Toriyama is wrong. It's not that Kitase is wrong or Nomura is wrong. I just don't agree with their philosophy. I don't find it enjoyable. But that doesn't mean that other people who do are wrong or something like that. There's an audience for what they're making. There are people who are super excited about where this is going. And I am genuinely happy and excited for those people. Like, you have a lot to look forward to. It's going to be awesome for you. It's just not for me. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, admittedly, my last topic point here is the most obvious one. Going forward, now what? We know they've already started work on part 2. We know that. That's been true for months at this point. And while it might be delayed a bit because of the COVID thing, at the same time, working from home on a video game is actually pretty smooth, so they might be doing that. Who knows? News has kind of trickled out, at least from my perspective on that one. But they are absolutely making part 2, which is admittedly a relief, because there was a legitimate possibility they wouldn't be, as I pointed out several times. But the problem here is, God, there's all the problems here, because what the hell are they going to do with part 2? Are they going to do the Zack back and forth thing I suggested? Are they going to have it faithfully follow the events of 7? Are they going to have it completely unfaithfully just tell their own new Elseworld story? The door has been blown open on that, and I actually have no idea what to think of that, personally.
I would be shocked if it ended up following the original story faithfully, especially given the meta element of this, which I don't think we've touched on yet, which is like they wanted to free themselves of the burden of the expectation, right?
Yeah.
Like they
Which-
wanted to break from the tradition and being held down by the purist gatekeeper fans who wanted them to follow it one for one.
Which
They're
are
trying to
definitely
get
not
away
the
from that.
ghosts.
From a certain perspective, I can kind of understand that because
Sure. I can
FF7
sympathize with it.
is the goose that laid the golden egg. You know, they will never reach that height again. So
I can sympathize with it. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to be held down to that standard. So here's the answer. Don't remake the game.
exactly,
If you aren't up to the task and you're burdened by that expectation and you want to do your own thing, do your own thing and make your own game.
Mhm.
Make something else.
yeah.
But
If this was Final Fantasy 16 and it was its own story with no connection to FF7 or anything like that, and it, everything was different.
whatever, you can keep
would've
telling
been
your
fine.
Defy Fate stories for eternity. Do whatever you want. But
Yeah.
like it's just so strange to me. And I mean, added on to this, Tetsuya Nomura didn't even know he was directing this game
Until
Until
the first trailer. Yeah.
announced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows if he even wanted to be a part of it in the first place?
You'll notice
He's not on it for the second one. Yeah. Hamaguchi's directing it.
Yeah, he's
supposedly.
out. He's out.
Yeah, so it's quite possible he didn't want to at all. So what's so strange to me is like, I don't know for a fact. Nobody can know. Everyone's sort of like theorizing that this meta element is what this means, right? It feels correct when you look at it that way, but
Mhm.
I can't say for sure I know that that's the intention. If it is the intention, if it really is, I find that to be incredibly self-indulgent.
Mhm.
To take what was beloved by millions of fans around the world and to make that story ultimately about you
Mhm.
and your personal struggle of creating this video game and feeling that burden of expectation. I don't care about that. I care about Cloud and Tifa and Aerith and Barrett. I care about the message there about
Mhm.
learning to value life, to value the life of human beings, to value the life of the planet, to stand up to corporate greed, to accept your own mortality.
Yeah, that's what it's ultimately a message about acceptance.
Yes, not defiance. And so it just feels so removed and so opposite of what that game's message was, that the spirit of it, both from a design standpoint in the gameplay all the way to what the story is trying to say, is just, to me, a betrayal of what FF7 was about. And that's not a remake, man. That's not a remake. And it's a bad sequel to like go backwards on that message. So
And I want to
Mhm.
add personally, I mentioned this last night. Of course, this is my theme that starts up here. I mentioned this last night. I really, really hope that the ghosts are not intended to be a meta commentary on purist fans, for lack of a better way to put that. Oh, don't change anything. It's got to follow the exact same story. I really hope not.
Yeah.
I really, really hope not. Because that lines up a little bit too neatly.
Mhm.
sure.
But ignoring that for a moment, I actually completely agree with you. And I want to say, this is me trying to be reasonable here, so forgive me for a second.
Go for it.
It took me years to get to the point, years and years and years, to get to the point where, I don't know how to phrase this. It's totally cool with taking in people's, your audience's perspective and opinions and behaviors and thoughts and comments and feelings and emotions, and at the same time, you can't take them too far. And that middle point, that slice right in the middle there of caring about your audience, but not allowing your audience to restrict you, is an extremely careful balance point that I've had to learn.
Mhm.
I mentioned just earlier, I'd kill Barrett. I would, because I feel because I feel it'd be a good story. That's why. And in my core thought and feeling and process as a creator, if you could even call me that, to me, if they just said, man, we want to do this and this and this, and then just did it, I'd be fine with that. If they just owned it, if they accepted it and committed to going ahead and making their own story and making their own remake or whatever the hell it is they actually want, because we don't, let's be honest with ourselves, we don't actually know.
Yeah.
We won't know until part 2. But
Sure.
if they had just committed to that, rather than going back and rather than having the ghosts as, let's be honest, an excuse, rather than trying to constantly wink and nudge, and rather than trying to have this whole, as you say, the meta narrative, and just doing it. Done. I would actually, I might not like the end result, but I would have substantially more respect for them on that purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I said this is me being fair. Sorry, so let me add the other side of that. That's hard to do. That is hard to do. And I'm a dinky little nobody. I can't even imagine what the creative team of Square Enix working on Final Fantasy VII Remake is feeling pressure-wise. That stress is real.
Oh, for sure.
And it's easier said than done. But I do think they should have done that. I do think they should do that going forwards. It may not be for me. It'll definitely not be for Mike. Might not be for some of the rest of us.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm fully on board with that.
I have no idea at this point. But I do hope that if nothing else, the big lesson they take away with this is just to own it. And say, all right, this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think they are committed.
I hope so.
At this point. I don't think they can. I don't think there's any way they can backtrack on this idea.
Oh, I do.
It would just.
That would be easy. You kidding me? I
can
think of 5 ways off the top of my head
I don't
could
mean
backwalk
like that
this.
it's impossible for them to do it. I don't think that. I'm saying outside of like a writing perspective, just the fact that they've gone this far with it.
I think a lot of people are
it would look really bad. It would be the Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker all over again.
Yeah. And
I think if Nomura's not involved, then maybe not. But I feel like the devs at Square are more committed to what they're doing than say Disney is. Disney's way more concerned about the fans being happy with them than Square is.
I will agree with that. Yeah, and that does give me some hope, such as it is, that at least whatever will come out will be something they give a damn about.
Yeah,
sure. They will at least care.
Looking at my notes here, before I mention my last point, do either of you have anything else you want to add on top of this?
I did, but I forgot about it.
You make notes.
Damn it, Mike! You've been speaking so eloquently that you've got me completely frazzled.
Sorry.
If you have any thoughts, go ahead. I'll try.
I think I've pretty much said my piece. And I guess just as a final thing, I think that whenever there's such a divisive title as this, I've been discussing this with people and debating back and forth, and I've seen a lot of different perspectives from mine. People who just see it so very, very differently from me. And not even just this game, but they're reading on the original too, right? The original is a very interpretive work. A lot of Final Fantasy games are. I totally respect everyone who loves this and is excited for the next one. I don't mean, my purpose here is not to persuade you to dislike this at all. It's just to share what I feel about it. And in terms of my decade, at least, if not more, of research on this series and my love and my passion for it, I believe I have arrived at the answer for what the spirit of Final Fantasy was. And it could be that you like the new Final Fantasy better than the old, and you're not wrong, right? Whatever philosophy you enjoy, that's great. It's just that when I play Lost Odyssey, I see it. I see it there. I see Final Fantasy's fingerprints all over Lost Odyssey and all over the last story, which I replayed both of those recently. And it's oh my gosh, it's right there. It's not about the brand name. It's about the formula. It's about the structure. It's about the approach. And the approach of how Final Fantasy is being made today, I do not like.
Yeah.
But if you like it, that's great, because you got a lot to look forward to. And there's going to be at least 2 more parts to this story. And it is a really bold move. And if you're into that and you think it's clever, I'm sure it's going to get even crazier. And you're going to have no idea where it's going. And you're going to be super surprised with what they come up with. And I genuinely hope that you get that experience that you're looking for.
Ultimately, I'm just in it now for morbid curiosity. I want to see where they go with it and how, not necessarily how bad they can make it, but just what they can come up with now that they are freed from expectations.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just agreeing.
I was just gonna say, as horrible as this sounds, I feel relieved to have the burden of choice removed from me. It doesn't really matter if I care or not. I'm going to play FF7R2 because you guys are going to pay me to. So whether I am specifically interested or invested or care isn't actually on the table for me. And I don't actually mean that as a derogatory statement. It really isn't something that's in my mind. I don't care. Not really.
Yeah.
I'm going to play it and I'm going to analyze it as best I can. That's my job. And I do try to be a professional about that. So that's not something I've actually analyzed for myself. So I don't have an answer to whether or not I'm looking forward to part 2 or not. I know several people asked that. Now, that being said, I do want to address 2 questions really quick. Dreamwhisperers patiently asked like 4 times, do I think this is a mistake being do I think this is a mistake being a PS4 exclusive? Absolutely yes. Even a timed exclusive, I think that what they should have done is they should have opened the door on this as much as they possibly could have, even if they had to delay it more to get the port made. Because this is going to sound horrible, but from a purely business perspective, FF7R is going to be The Force Awakens, sales-wise. It was the first Star Wars movie in years and years and years, and
I agree with
sold
this so hard.
like crazy. Because, and for no other reason, regardless of quality, regardless of whether you liked the movie, regardless of anything else, everybody saw Force Awakens. It's one of the best-selling movies of all time, depending on which metric you're using. And they should have done that with FF7R1. They really should have opened the floodgates on it. Because now, in a year, when this comes out on the Xbox and PC and whatever else it is, that is gone. That particular sales marketing bubble is completely vanished.
Now, here's the thing. I wonder if they made up for that loss of sales with Sony partially funding the game.
I don't know. I've actually looked into that, and I can't find hard data on it, so I don't know. Unfortunately.
I would assume that's
so,
the
yeah.
only reason they would have done that.
Yeah.
Well, contractual obligations might have forced them into it, too. Because Square has had several contracts with Sony for years at this point, and those may still be valid for this.
But didn't it launch on or Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 15 launch simultaneously?
Yeah, they launched simultaneously on Xbox.
They did, but then you look at, say,
wonder...
Kingdom Hearts, which had a pseudo-simultaneous launch, and then you look at FF15, which didn't have a simultaneous launch at all. Like, there's several examples of games they've pushed out where it's clear that there's some contracts there that we don't know about. I'm not sure what the wording is, basically. That's all. I'm just offering the possibility of doubt, because I don't know what they're actually doing.
Sure.
So I did remember what I was going to say.
Do it.
Not to interrupt you, Laura, if you were going to
Hang on,
go
let me
into
see.
something.
Where's my Frostmourne? Hang on, I got it ready. Right here.
So, Mike actually brought this up on his podcast. Final Fantasy 3 and 4 have definitive editions, which are fantastic in my opinion. 5 and 6 also have, in my opinion, definitive editions, which are pretty good. They've got cleaned up translations on the GBA. Final Fantasy 7 now, and for the past 23 years, has not.
Yep.
This could have been that, and it will never be at this point. If Final Fantasy 7 launching on like the PC, the new PC port, and the PS4, and the Switch port, and everything like that, if that had been a cleaned up translation, fixing all the bugs, everything like that, had been a definitive edition, I would be much more in favor of this remake. Just go ahead and rewrite it, go crazy with it, because we've got something to go back to that is not just the original, so to speak.
Right.
I think that is my biggest sticking point.
If I could add on top of that, because I actually agree with you completely, I have said for quite some time that I actually don't think there is a definitive version of 6 or 7. That those are the big ones, the big gaps that have never
Okay, yeah, fair enough. There's
polished.
there's the sound and the music issue.
And then there's
6
also
as
some
well.
other things I don't want to get into right now. But yeah, basically, there is no definitive version of 6. There's no definitive version of 7, in my opinion. Trials of Mana recently got an official release and translation, and is getting a remake. You already see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, they're going in both directions.
Why?
They can do it. They've proven that they can do it.
If you're willing to do that for Seiken Densetsu 3, Why are you not willing to do that for Final Fantasy freaking 7?
Yeah.
Now,
Makes no sense.
in the interests of honesty, they may still have that under the hood somewhere. That may still be something they're thinking about doing. And I gotta be blunt, I would.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee you, in the wake of this is the perfect time to release a polished version of FF7 original with new translation and fixing some of the bugs and maybe adjusting a few little things here and there. Not basically a remaster, not actually.
It makes way too much sense.
Yeah.
You gotta consider who you're talking about here.
And it's what more than half of the fans wanted in the first place. You know?
And if I could be so bold, that would, I think, sell for both sides of the people on this argument. Because the people who like FF7R1 want to play the original. The people who don't like it want the polished version.
Yep.
You have a huge... That's why this needs to happen now. Because this is a huge opportunity for them to capitalize on that.
It would have been so smart if they had any foresight whatsoever. Because they kept saying in interviews, I think we're going to please everybody with this. It's like there's no way they actually believed that.
No.
They had to have known it would have been hugely controversial and divisive. So the best time ever is literally like a week after the game comes out and everyone starts freaking out. Be like, oh, by the way, we got this ready for you guys who are disgruntled.
Yeah, the marketing sells itself. It really does. I can't be the only one who studied marketing. Come on. God. Anyway, sorry. Squirrels for brains. I don't actually use that phrase as an insult. It's just because I cannot understand anything Square Enix does. They have squirrels for brains.
I haven't since 2003.
Yep.
I did have one last question. I wanted to save the big question for last. I didn't even prep either of you for this.
Okay.
I want you to imagine that the ball is in your court for doing like you're the mainliner, the main creative lead on FF7 remake. Let's assume for a moment that it's a proper remake. Let's just go that way with it.
Okay.
Would you be willing to do things like I kind of already mentioned? I'd kill Barrett, right? Would you be willing to do major changes like that to the story, or would you deliberately restrict yourself from it? Now, here's the important part. You'd be restricting yourself from changes that you personally feel, whatever they may be, would be good narrative, because that's the point, like I said with the Barrett thing.
Yeah.
Would you deliberately say, no, we have to stay faithful to the original? This is for you in chat, too.
I'd have to be really convinced.
Yeah,
I mean, fully 100% positively convinced that this is a better choice for the story, and especially relating to its core theme, than what the original did. And it would be very hard to convince me of that, because while Final Fantasy VII is far from a perfect game in terms of its dialogue, right, translation, things of that nature, from just the technical storytelling standpoint, it is among the best video game stories I've ever seen. And whether or not that's lightning in a bottle and it was like they did a lot of these things on accident, who can say? But it is really technically solid. So to have the conceit to say that I think I have a better idea than that, I would check myself hard there.
Yeah.
But if I was totally convinced that was going to be the case, then of course, if it's better for the story, you do it.
Okay. What about you, Rex?
So it's funny. I was actually thinking about this while I was in the shower, this particular question. So when it comes to some of the bigger stuff, like I mentioned Aerith's death, sorry. That is the emotional core of the game. I think that the cloud reveal is the big twist that should be preserved. So a lot of the bigger stuff, I'd say, should stay intact, like no matter what. But when it comes to expanding and maybe changing some more minor elements, like very minor, not like, oh, I'd change Dine's story. No, I wouldn't do stuff like that. I think that, again, I'd probably need to also be convinced. I'd probably need to get a second opinion, hopefully get a second opinion from Sakaguchi himself, if that's possible.
Yeah, just reach out to him and be like, hey, I had a thought.
Yeah, but, I am hesitant to just say yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And to dovetail on what you're saying, the expanding part of it, I think, is great. Like
I said, Chapter 4 with Jesse, I think perfect, you know?
That and the chapter 2 with seeing how the explosion is affecting the people.
Mhm.
Like these things leading to like Barrett's arc being stronger,
Yeah.
I think are like no-brainers. I would absolutely do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of like a killing Barrett, kind of like Laura's saying, yeah, I'd have to be totally convinced that this is the right thing to do.
In my defense, Nero says, I'm with them too. I would have to be very careful about big changes too, but I would be unhesitating in big changes.
That said, a lot of Final Fantasy VII, a lot of the stuff that we see in the remake is stuff that was left on the cutting room floor. It's left in the files, you know, we see it in the script, but it's just not there in the final product. I would probably definitely go back and reference that as kind of like a skeleton to build off of.
I'm debating if I want to keep going on that point. No, I think we're good. I think we're good. It's just, this all came from me, not really the killing Barrett thing, although I do stand by that. But really, the question I had in the back of my mind was, would I spare Eris? And obviously, I mean, that's one of the core emotional elements of the game, right? In many, 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 many ways. But what's funny is I couldn't come up with an answer for that, if I would or wouldn't. And the problem is because that relies on the specifics. It has to, by definition. Because I can't just do that to change things, as I was talking about.
Yeah, no, you have to write around it really, really carefully.
Yeah, there would need to be a very careful crafting. And by the way, in addition, if I was going to change things, I would have mapped this all out in advance, because I'm a big fan of front-loaded storytelling. But if I was going to spare Eris, I would have to make damn sure I had a very good reason to do so narratively, rather than just to make a change, or because it's cool, or whatever.
Right.
And as Dakota points out, Eris is still relevant to the story after her death, so the entirety of that would have to be fundamentally restructured, in order to accommodate. Now, I will say this, and this is just my own personal opinion, though. While Eris's death is such an emotional core to FF7, and I see several people in chat saying that you guys have said that as well, I have to be honest, I'm not actually sure I agree. I think Tifa and Cloud, and the way they rotate around each other, is really the emotional core of FF7, for me personally.
I could see it either way, actually.
The way they interact with each other, the way they learn to understand their own caring about each other.
The payoff in front of the high wind, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's amazing.
That being said, Eris's death is still obviously a big scene, and I'm not sure if I would change that. Barrett's death I would only do because it fit perfectly for me. So, final thing before we cut off, because we do have other things to do. I'm basically just going to open the floor a little bit for questions, if anybody has any big ones in the chat.
Yeah, please.
Yep. We're actually at the last boss track here.
I do actually want to mention one last thing. In terms of proper remakes, I really wish they went the Black Mesa route with this. Black Mesa it largely follows the structure of the original Half-Life, but it expands. It cuts out some of the stuff that doesn't work very well, and it's perfect in my opinion. It takes an entire section of the game and completely redoes it, for example.
Platinum Pineapple.
I think that... Sorry. I think that FF7R could have benefited from that sort of mentality as well.
I mean, that is the usual approach to a proper remake in general. But anyways, so I'm losing questions already. This is why I wanted to start in quick. What role would you guys want Jenova to play in the remake, so in the existing game?
I don't know if it has to change at all from the original.
Yeah.
Jenova was being controlled by Sephiroth for gathering the reunion theory, right? So,
yep, I'm with that.
Same as the original.
If I could retroactively go back and change R1, I would say have her be the force that is doing this whole fate thing, if you had to include the fate thing as a narrative device.
Rather than Sephiroth,
rather than these ghosts, if they're just, the will of the planet or whatever.
I could see that. I'm still not sure I'd like it, but I could see that. Platinum Pineapple asked, was this game falsely advertised?
Yes.
I wouldn't say falsely advertised, because I do think that they were at least forthright in saying that they were going to make changes.
Well, yeah, of course, but I don't think anyone expected it to be to this degree.
Yeah, I would say for sure it's misleading.
Mm-hmm.
When we say false advertisement, it's like they showed us something and then they didn't give us that. It's like all the material they showed was true to what we received, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I have a hard time crossing all the way over to saying it's falsely advertised. But using the word remake in the way that they thought was clever, right? It's actually an in-universe spin on the term of remaking the timeline.
Yeah,
That's misleading, I would say. But
and
I don't know if I'd
that's
go all
that's
in.
what I'm referring to when I say yes.
Yeah.
I'm referring to the remake thing.
Yeah, I agree with you there for sure.
I will also add, I don't think this is legally false advertising, which is a completely separate thing.
No, yeah, that's completely different.
Right. That's what I was.
Yeah. Just real quick. Item use. Did anyone try leaning on grenade types? I didn't. Anyone else?
I sold my grenades.
I never used it, not once.
Yeah, items take up ATB.
Are they good?
They were on the original, but only for speedruns. Thoughts on the new One-Winged Angel rendition? It was good.
Fine.
Ignoring the introductory part, that it was just kind of
Yeah.
That little leitmotif.
I did like it when it fully went into the orchestration of One-Winged
Sure.
Angel proper.
Sure.
There's another marketing question. Parrot's death question. Why did Sephiroth need Cloud's group to take down the Arbiters of Fate when he could have clearly done it himself?
Wait, say it again. I didn't catch the last.
Why
part.
did Sephiroth need Cloud's group to take down the Arbiters of Fate when he could clearly do it himself?
This is the whole problem I have with soft magic in stories.
It's very inconsistent.
I don't know any of the rules behind how the ghosts operate.
Exactly.
So I can't answer the question. I have no idea how any of this operates. So it's just they do whatever they want, and I can't say why. I have no idea.
Yeah, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think speculation is kind of useless right now. We have what I like to refer to as the problem of a blank sheet of paper. There's nothing there to speculate with, really.
Yeah.
However, I will say this also makes it make more sense for me personally that Sephiroth was controlling them from the very beginning. Because the only thing then that he would need from them is like, okay, go do this to change the timeline and blah, blah, blah. It was just him. How do I phrase this?
The whole time.
It was just him the whole time, yeah. There was no need for them to defeat Fate because there's no Fate. He was just playing with them to get them to this. Here's a link to Resonant Ark's YouTube channel really quick, Resonant Ark, Righteous Ham. And for anybody else who wants that, he is awesome. You should really go watch their stuff. They have awesome stuff over there. Mike is way more eloquent than I am. I just kind of, I improv, he prepares.
Here's the thing, though. You're way more structured and organized than me.
I do have,
Yeah, I
you have a
noticed
schedule
that, yeah.
that people know when your next thing's coming. I remember once a month that I have a YouTube channel, and I decide to upload something.
Still trying to catch up on questions here. Do you think, this is for all of us, of course, do you think they'll try to include multiple story paths and multiple endings?
I considered that as a possibility. Ultimately, I think budgetary concerns and time constraints are going to limit that and basically make it so that they can't ultimately realize that.
Mike?
I don't know, man. And to be honest, and this isn't in disrespect to the question, I just don't care.
Yeah.
I really just don't care at this point.
I don't think they will at all, no. I think it would be a mistake, and I don't think they're even beginning to go that route with it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Sephiroth can have an impact after they already did everything with him, including the One-Winged Angel?
Oh, no way. Especially with the way that they just stole the literal, like, shot for shot, like, reverse, like, when they're zooming in on Cloud and Sephiroth facing it down. They can't repeat that.
They
The impact of that in the ending, they have to remake that entirely, just do something totally different.
Yep.
There's no way. There's no freaking way.
Not only that, but consider the scale of what we just experienced. Go to the Midgar Zolom after that. Now, can we defeat the Midgar Zolom? You know,
We should.
how are we going to match the impact of what we just experienced?
There's no way.
Yeah,
Is
no.
the
This is something I actually.
This is what leads. This is what leads me to believe that they're not going to follow the original course of events at all. That they're totally breaking away from it. And they're rewriting it entirely from scratch.
Yeah.
I will say, though, rewriting or not, one of the biggest problems I have with the fact that they had the big, flashy, epic conclusion is that literally no matter what they do, they're going to either have a massive Whiplash problem or they're going to have a Dragon Ball Z problem.
Yeah.
Because either they have to keep escalating, which is the Dragon Ball Z thing, and now we're back down to Earth. And granted, I think they're going to do the latter because, as my viewers can point out, I complained near constantly about the massive inconsistency of the superhuman nature of Cloud in particular.
Crazy. Just crazy.
Yeah, they bounce back and forth between he is a super soldier, Captain America style, and he can be brought down by something simple and normal that would bother you or me. And the inconsistency of that is what bothers me. Anyway, sorry. I'm trying to push through these questions. I am so far behind on chat at this point. I am literally 6 minutes behind on chat.
If you guys, if we miss your questions, please repeat them.
Yeah. So, does this game work for first-timers as an entry point to FF7?
No.
Absolutely not. Please, for the love of God, do not make this your first experience with Final Fantasy VII.
If you play Final Fantasy, play the original. Please go play the original.
It's on the Switch. It's on the PC. You can get a PS4.
I'm pretty sure I could wake up tomorrow and play FF7 tomorrow on my fridge. Go play it.
No, that's Doom. Golvig asks, how much is your reaction influenced by the fact that you came in expecting a remake and not a sequel? Now, let me answer that first, if I may, really quickly.
Sure.
As I pointed out several times, I figured out that this was a sequel way early. And that probably did color my overall opinion more positively than I otherwise would have been, because I was like, oh, okay, this is following through on Advent Children. Got it. And I had that mentality for like 30, 40 hours of gameplay. So that did absolutely change my opinion. Yeah, go ahead, guys.
Softened it.
Admittedly, my opinion is not quite so positive because I wasn't really cued into the fact that it was a sequel quite as early as lore was. But knowing that they were making changes and knowing everything that we knew from interviews and stuff like that, I'd say my opinion was a bit more positively inclined than it otherwise would be if I had been blindsided by most of this stuff, for example.
Yeah, I wasn't going to play the game, and then I heard about this, and then I had to see
it for yourself. Yeah.
I literally only played it because of how crazy this was. And I was like, I got to make a video on it, but if I'm going to make a video on it, I have to have played it. Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite. So that's the whole reason. So I wasn't blindsided by it, really. So I don't think any of us really got hit the way it was intended.
Yeah. Look, I analyze fiction for a living. What do you want from me?
Yeah.
So Jincamio asks, what's the best scene in the game for you and the worst scene in the game for you? Now, I know my worst right off the top of my head. I'll have to think about best. I'll tell you the worst really quick. Platefall.
Okay.
Which one? Platefall. I think they completely screwed up the Platefall scene. So much. So bad. And that it even ignoring the original, it sapped all of my attention and interest and emotional investment, and I was just staring at it like, what? The entire time.
For me, it's either that as the worst, or, if this even counts, the removal of the following the trail of blood and replacing that with a 2-hour dungeon.
Yeah, that's
the most disappointing parts. But I'll tell you the part I loved. I loved that they added the little tour that you take of the Shinra building.
Yeah.
And how they had that VR section.
That was so good.
And here's why I loved this. I thought it was freaking brilliant. Because this is one of the core themes of the original that I felt was actually very well retained and even actually maybe presented a little better, was the whole corporate greed side of it. If you examine Disney's almost complete monopoly on the entertainment industry, or at least the trajectory on which they are arriving there. But you go into Disney World or Disneyland, the park, and you see
they've got this family-friendly veneer,
magical face where you're in that park and you cannot feel bad. It's just like, this is so awesome, and it just feels magical. I got that sense from that presentation in that little VR.
Same here.
And it was like, whoa, if I didn't know better, I would be on board with this message.
Yep. And that's
And
another.
that was
that was so.
great.
Yeah, several people in chat brought up the exact same thing you did. The Disneyland. It
Yep.
felt like a Disneyland thing, and that was brilliant. I agree absolutely. I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, but that was really well done.
Yeah, it was super good. That's probably my favorite scene.
Yeah, for me, it's either between that or the aftermath of Sector 7 Platefall with Barrett and Tifa.
That was great too. Yeah.
Just perfect character writing at that point.
Yeah.
I'm actually really torn because for me, you both list absolutely amazing scenes, but I have to admit the Honeybee Inn was just pure joy.
Okay, yeah, true. The Yakuza tone of Wall Market, I was totally down with.
It was like I had several issues with Wall Market, but when you finally got to the Honeybee Inn and finally started seeing Andrea, and that whole sequence of events was extremely well done. It was cheesy as crap, and it knew it, and it embraced it fully, and I liked that.
Yep. Committed to the tone for sure.
Sorry, so I can scroll up here. I've missed another couple of shit. So I already know my answer to this one. I'm going to truncate this a little bit. Does this game retroactively taint the original for you?
No, absolutely not. I can, in the same way that I can separate, for example, the original two Star Wars trilogies from the sequel trilogy, I can also do so with Final Fantasy VII.
I agree 100%.
Yeah,
I'll go back and play this, and I'll forget the remake ever existed.
Yeah.
I will. Funnily, I will not do that. I will go back and play the original, and I will think of the characterization that the remake added, and I will superimpose that on the original.
I'll probably do the same thing, you know, because the characterization is one of the things that I think is far and away better than the original.
Yeah. No, I can dissect that. I can mix and match. I know how to do that. I'm good. There's some really good stuff here, and this is actually a question of mine. Sorry, I meant to mention this. How many of you out there, this is for chat as well, how many of you out there have had the desire in the wake of FF7R1 to go play the original?
Actually, I'm going to do that tonight. I was going to play P5R, but you know what? No. I'm going to play FF7.
Mike?
I have probably at least 4 places where I have like 100 save files for every single important moment in the game on my Steam version, on my PlayStation 1 version, on my Switch version, everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I will probably still start within the next week or so a new file on Final Fantasy VII and play it all the way through.
Yeah. And like I said, they should have done the remaster idea. This is the perfect time for that.
Yeah.
And if you were looking at chat, there's a whole lot of me's and yes and I and just yeah.
For those of you who've played the Switch version, is it good? Is it like the definitive version,
love it.
so to speak?
It is as good as it gets, basically.
Because I've got it, and I'm
has
eager to
essentially
play
the
it.
same kind of quality of life updates. You know, the being able to speed up by 3 times and
so like the same stuff that FF9 did, for example.
Yeah, turn off the random encounters, and then plus you can take it on the go. So those two things being combined for me makes it my favorite version of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going anywhere soon, but
I take the train. Well, obviously not now, but sometimes I take the train. And so having it on the go is really nice for me.
No version has a fixed translation, Kendrick, to be clear.
Yeah, no. For that, you'd have to point to fan translations, and those have their own problems.
Yep.
That's the one positive for the Steam or PC version is being able to mod it, right?
I actually wouldn't be surprised if this remake was used as the script for this remake was used as the basis for another fan translation.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all. If you consider the whole Destiny angle finished now, and the rest of the game somehow follows the path of the original story faithfully, just with an Everyone Lives storyline, how would you think about that?
I'd be so confused by that.
I'd be very, yeah.
I
we stopped Sephiroth with no losses, no character development, no.
You make such a big deal about breaking free of Destiny, and then you just follow Destiny. I would be so confused by that.
No,
Red 13 actually. I'm sorry, Lord. Red 13 actually makes a point of saying, the ending of FF7 is the bad future, a vision of tomorrow if we fail here today. While I think that is kind of the case because, you know, they suffered losses and everything like that. I think that growth through adversity is important for these characters and for characters in general.
Yeah.
So I don't think something like that is even feasible.
Just to reiterate, I've actually already given my opinion on that. I think that would mean they didn't commit and they pulled a Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, oh no, people don't like it. Quick, reverse. Okay. No, it's just FF7R now. What really, if I can just rant on this for one final more second here, they could still do the remaster idea I posited earlier.
Yeah,
like they could be like, right now, you know, there's a lot of interest. Maybe we should start that project.
Mm-hmm.
And just set aside a team to go through and do what is effectively a polishing pass.
Mm-hmm.
It's sold well enough to fund something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's
do it.
whatever. Would you be weary of seeing Square Enix remake any other FFs after this one?
I never again will I touch a Final Fantasy remake done in this style. If it's done like Trials of Mana, I'm on board. If it's done like FF7R, no way.
I'm kind of two minds personally because, you know, FF4 DS and its derivatives are one of my favorite remakes of all time. You know, I paid lip service to Black Mesa, but FF4 is probably the other example I'd go to.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I would say, like, if they were doing a Trials of Mana sort of a thing, sure. But something in this style, definitely not. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. I'm kind of with Rax on that. I mean, a lot of my opinion is going to depend on how Trials of Mana is.
Mm-hmm.
Because
it looks good, but so did this for a good while.
The Secret of Mana remaster, because that's what it is, didn't go the full remake direct route for me, and that's part of why I'm hesitant. And of course, I have to be honest and acknowledge that Square Enix is multiple teams and multiple people, and there's varying levels of quality within the blob at this point. So
yeah.
But that being said, I'll go ahead and give something that I actually was asked last night off camera. An emotional question. Like, okay, real quick. Mike, what's your favorite FF?
Final Fantasy VII.
Rex, 9?
Oh, this must hurt. 9.
Okay, mine's 6. Y'all know that.
Mm-hmm.
If they announced tomorrow they were doing what they marketed as a proper remake of 9 and 6, obviously this doesn't really apply to Mike, sorry dude.
Still love those games.
Would
Yeah.
what would be the emotional core gut reaction to, hey, they're doing a remake of FF6. Hey, they're doing a remake of FF9.
If they announced it tomorrow, you said?
Yeah, like, hey, we're working on this.
Immediate hesitation.
Yeah, my first gut reaction would be, okay.
Just total apathy at this point. I've accepted what they are. I know I'm not going to like it already.
J. Maria Graywall asks a very complex question, which I'm actually not going to ask because it's another 40-minute question. So, in summary, in order to change the gameplay to be both accessible and properly challenging would require almost a complete overhaul.
Yeah.
And I don't ask me to go through the list. It's a lot of stuff. We mentioned several things earlier.
Yeah.
Are you actually remaking it? I mean, maybe? Okay, I got one last question. This is from me. Because this is something I think about all the damn time. And I'm actually curious. And this goes for chat too, but I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Let's assume that Q shows up, or whatever, and is like, hey, you are now the creative lead of a proper remake of, I guess 7 in your case, and 9 in your case, Rax. Let's assume that this is something that you can do whatever you want to with it and how you want to present with it. And this is kind of a two-part question. The first is, what's your immediate emotional reaction to that?
I'd be definitely intimidated by it, but
oh, absolutely.
After, if I had the chance to have played this, I would have felt a lot better about my chances.
I would definitely take my experiences from this and learn from them and apply them to a remake like that. Because while I do enjoy a lot of the gameplay concepts, and I do think the expansion of the story is great, there's a lot wrong with this that I would say, okay, no, we need to tweak this, we need to fix this, we need to reject this, you know?
Yeah. Now, the second part of the question is admittedly cheating a little bit, because the second part of the question is, let's say you're given the option to say no. Would you?
Okay. Yeah.
Could I choose, assuming it is being made anyway, could I choose who it goes to?
No, because it's not being made if you're not doing it.
Okay, fair enough. Then, yeah, no.
I'm not a game designer, so I would say no.
Okay.
Neither am I. And to me, the original is already good enough that a remake is not necessary. I don't view remakes as a necessary product.
And unless it's Dragon Quest 1.
Okay, there are some cases, but
There is something to be said for that, though, right? Like, what is really the point of remakes in a historical sense? It almost never ends up being a product that's worthy of any like real intellectual dissection, except for in very few cases, like John Carpenter's The Thing, where sometimes they can make a definitive version out of the remake. And like I said in my podcast, like you brought up, I think FF4 on the DS, or some people will say the complete PSP collection, is that for Final Fantasy IV. If you can do that, it's worth remaking. If you're not going to do that, like most projects end up being, it's not worth doing.
Yeah,
I was going to say the vast majority end up not being that.
Yeah. True Grit is a good example. I saw that one in there too. I really like the new True Grit versus the 1960s version.
The Resident Evil remakes, especially 1 and 2, I would say are vast exceptions.
Sure.
Yeah. I actually agree with Velhard in chat. If you're going to do a remake, you need to ask yourself, what's wrong with the original that needs to be overhauled? That doesn't.
What value am I adding to this product?
Yeah. I will admit, I am also obviously not a game designer, but I think about game design all the time. I would love to sink my claws into FF1 through 9. All 9 of them. I could think of tons of things I would love to change and love to alter and love to fix and polish and pull it into a more modern perspective. You know, keeping the core together. But especially with FF1 through, I'd say, 5. Because FF1 through 5 all have the same problem to some extent or another, and that is absences of story. Just like there's story there. I'm not trying to say there isn't, but it is very. Here's a few lines of dialogue, and then you go do a dungeon. Here's another few lines, and then you go do a dungeon, and so forth and so on. And
yeah, you have the bare bones of a story that is abstracted based on the limitations of the hardware.
And there's
I think for that reason, it's a lot easier to remake Final Fantasy 1 than it is to remake Final Fantasy 7.
That's actually the exact reason why I specifically called it from 1 to 5, because 6 up to 9 has quite a bit of story, and remaking those, that would... Okay, hang on. Let me think about that a little bit more clearly. Like 8, I would love to tackle, but 8, if I'm being honest, would be mostly a polishing pass and a gameplay change. Like the story, I would barely change in 8, really. But to fix several aspects of the game design of 8 and push that out and reprocess that. Yeah, absolutely. 7, ironically, so my chat knows this because we've talked about this topic before. I've never really thought about remaking 7.
Neither have I. Like it entered my mind when the tech demo happened in 2006, right? But ultimately, it's there,
Yeah.
I didn't need it.
And for those of you who don't understand why I'm pointing this out as a separate thing, I have put thought into what I would do to remake 1 through 6 and 8. I know and 9, actually, if I'm being honest. I know exactly the kind of directions I would go with all 8 of those games. I've never thought about remaking 7 other than doing the obvious polishing pass of the script. That's it. So, my own thoughts on that. I'm going to go ahead and chop this off. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you, Mike, for taking time out of nowhere. I asked him last night, hey, dude, you want to jump on for this completely impromptu stream?
I'm always down for talking FF7.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Well, you are more than welcome here, and thank you very, very much again. And Rax, thank you for joining us. You're terrible and awful, and I hate you. I'm going to chop out, guys. For those of you at home, we will be streaming again as our usual. Second block today, we'll be starting Grandia in afternoon. So, see you there, guys.
Nice.